provided through the Canada infrastructure program. And so as we go forward, we know that next 5 years, there's a lot, we're able to bring more resources to bear to the cast iron and the water distribution program system. And certainly we'll look to enhance and move quicker on the cast iron program. So with all that, we're still looking for a 6%. Even the biggest pressure on that, of course, is the water rate breaks and the costs associated with that. There's also a 5% increase proposed in the sewer rates. And again, as we said, we look forward to carrying on with the initiatives that we've started, which were started last year and the year before, and carry forward and get those completed. And I also want, again, to thank our staff for all their hard work to get the budget put together and to council in time. We know it was a monumental task. Everybody pitched in, worked together as a team to make sure we got something to council that fit in with your guidance to us and direction. So with that, I would pass it on to Mr. Acker. He has the next presentation, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Acker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a PowerPoint presentation this evening to introduce the 2020 operating budget, capital budget, and equipment budget to City Council and the community. I'd like to start off just talking a little bit about the budgeting framework that the city utilizes to prepare a budget. We use a planning framework, and that encompasses our strategic planning that our city manager just spoke of. Also encompasses planning sessions. We had a number of planning sessions with council. Council provided very good direction in terms of the budget. And we also have a number of matters as we go through the year where you have referrals or tabled matters, you tabled the budget. So we take that all into account. And what we do is prepare a call for estimates for the budget, taking into account all of that. And then the departments utilize that framework to develop their business plans. City administration balances service levels, expectations, and affordability in doing that. Those sort of all weigh in together. Obviously, if affordability wasn't an issue, it's very easy to solve a lot of your service delivery problems, but we take all of those things into account to be able to produce a budget for you. External factors certainly play a major role in the budget. The provincial economy, really how the provincial economy goes has a very major impact on the city. A good example of that is our revenue sharing. We get 0.75% of the provincial sales tax. So if the provincial economy is doing well, there's more money in revenue sharing for us. Also, the local economy plays a very, very important role in our budget. As our economy grows and we have more economic activity, we generate more tax revenues, and we also have more demands in terms of our services and those sorts of things. So it's a bit of a balancing act, but it certainly has a major impact on the budget. Financial factors, things like inflation, the increases to our various collective agreements, those all factor into our budget as well. So all of those influence the budget, and at the end of the day, we have the budget that we are going to present to you this evening. I'd like to start off with the 2020 general operating budget. This chart just gives you an overview of the revenues in terms of that budget. And you can see some of the major revenue areas. Municipal taxation is about 57% of our budget, so by far the largest revenue source. Provincial grants and subsidies is about 21.3%. You add those together, that's almost 80% of our revenues there. And then we have a lot of smaller sources of revenues, which I won't go through, but you can see from the chart. Municipal tax levy, I just wanted to speak a little bit about that one since it does play such a large role in our overall revenues. And as you can see, we've had steady increase in our overall municipal tax levy over this period of this graph. That is a good thing. You do have to expect that your tax revenues are going to grow to be able to pay for the cost of living increases, the salary increases that are into the budget. And we've had that process as we've moved along. Certainly different than previous eras with the city. We did, as an example, in the 90s, we had a very long period of time where we really didn't have a lot of increase in the municipal tax levy. And that results in over time, really reductions in your overall levels of service. So the fact that our municipal tax levy is going up is a good thing overall. City continues, unfortunately, though, to suffer commercial tax losses. That's a snapshot of where we're at right now for 2019. You can see, again, it's a a fairly significant loss of commercial taxes, about $400,000, well, 320 for commercial, and then there's a number of other areas totaling about 400,000. This chart is a summary of 2013 to 2019 in that regard. And really what's important there is you can see we've lost a very significant amount of commercial assessment over that period of time. And that translates into about $1.8 million in tax revenue. So it's very significant. And it's obviously been a challenge for that sector because the City of Moose Jaw's tax policy is to recover those monies from within that sector. So it makes it difficult to continue to make sure that we're competitive in terms of our taxes in that area. Over the last several years, the city has taken a tax sharing approach to tax increases. That was an initiative introduced by council. And the rationale for that was to try to slowly and steadily decrease the tax gap between residential and commercial properties. As you can see in 2017, that was 2.25 times. In 2019, it's 2.19 times. So it has been a slow, steady decrease. And that is something the administration will ask council again this year to continue that tax sharing approach. We feel it is moving taxes in the right direction in terms of that gap. So it would be an initiative that you'll see come forward in tax policy again to continue on with that. I wanted to go through some of the items of note in terms of the revenues in the general operating budget. You'll note rents and concessions are down about $170,000, and that's due to a reduction in farmland rents and airport rents. As part of our Southeast Industrial Development, there are farmlands that we will no longer be able to rent. We will be selling them. So we're seeing a reduction in our farmland rents as well related to the Airport Authority. We've now given them some of the farmland rental revenue that surrounds the airport. So again, that wouldn't be city revenue anymore. That is Airport Authority revenue. And in terms of the airport rents, that would be our hangar rentals. So that again, we have provided to the Airport Authority as part of their funding. Fines and penalties are down about $540,000, and that's due to a reduction in our automated speed enforcement revenues. So that's our photo radar. That has decreased. That is something we expected. The province sort of changed how that worked going into this year. They are paying a lot of the costs associated with that, but they're also retaining revenues to do that. And at the same time as well, they're sharing some of those revenues with other municipalities. Parks and recreation revenues are up about $710,000. The biggest factor in that is the inclusion of Viera Center, now a city facility, significant revenues there that are included in our revenue streams for Parks and Rec, and as well the implementation of a recreational season pass program has been very successful and has had an impact on revenues as well. Wanted to talk about one of our very significant revenues, and that's provincial revenue sharing. As you can see, we're expecting about a $650,000 increase in 2020, which is putting us on an upward trend again. We sort of bottomed out with that in 2018, but it plays a very significant role in our overall revenues. So it's a partnership and sharing with the provincial government to provide us revenues to help deliver some of our programs and services, and certainly plays a major impact overall in our revenues and certainly in 2020. So overall, our revenues are up just over 2%, or $981,631. So going to our expenditures, the city has a number of key service areas, and you can see from that chart, some of our major areas: general government, fire department, police services, other protection. The fire department, police services, other protection, we normally would classify that as protective services. That makes up about 40.5% of our budget. So certainly significant overall. And then you can see some of our other areas where we have some significant provisions in the budget as well. One area I would highlight is the provisions, miscellaneous and debt. The largest portion of that is provisions to other funds. So what we're doing there is appropriating tax dollars for other funds. Almost $4 million of our municipal tax levy goes to either the waterworks or the capital expenditure fund. So it's a major contribution to those funds. Expenditure items of note. Again, it's a status quo budget. We're delivering the same programs and services as we did last year. Any new requests are to be a decision of City Council. That's why you see those items on your agenda. Those are new items, new requests for Council to entertain. And I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the specific areas where you'll see increases. So our general government area is up about $300,000. Our city clerk solicitor area is up about $46,000. The bulk of that is actually just a shifting of expenditures between business units. Previously, all of our memberships were in another business unit. They've now shifted to the city clerk solicitor area. So although it looks like that area is up significantly, it's really just an adjustment overall. Information technology, up about $109,000. That's additional equipment reserve contributions as well as software maintenance agreements. Most of our software now is on a sort of maintenance agreement basis. So what you end up doing is paying a fee every year to receive updates for the software support and that sort of thing. Plays a very significant role. The fact those costs are up probably is not a surprise. Almost everything we do now has some technology component to it. And our information technology department obviously has to provide those services and the support for them. I know it wasn't that many years ago where the information technology department was within the Department of Financial Services and we had one employee. We certainly grow into a much larger department to support that technology for the city, but some of those cost increases are going to go along with that. Human resources is up about $43,000. Again, the majority of this is actually other departments transferring some of their training dollars to the human resources department. What we've done is try to centralize our overall training for a lot of our programs that relate to our succession planning. And it was felt as a city as a whole, it was much better managed in one central area. So although you're seeing an increase in their budget, you will see decreases in education and some of the other areas. Employer paid benefits are up about $49,000. That increase is primarily in the Canada Pension Plan. As most of us are aware, there's a step process for increasing the overall contribution of employees and employers. So that's a large portion of that. And there's also some increased pension costs for the city that are showing up in that account. I guess the bottom line is it costs more each year to provide the same programs and services. So certainly as we go through a budget process, we do expect to see some increases in costs. Our most significant cost is salaries and benefits. This chart gives you an idea overall. It's about 58% of our budget that you see before you tonight. So of the operating budget, that's about $29 million in salaries, and each 1% increase is about $290,000. So you can see some of our areas like fire and police are very labor intensive. Majority of their expenditures relate to that. Some of our other areas not so much so. But overall, salaries and benefits really play a major factor in the overall expenditures of the city of Moose Jaw. So I just wanted to talk again about some of the expenditures you'll see as you go through the expenditure summary. Areas where you will see increased costs are fire service, up about $737,000, and that's primarily due to increased labor costs. That relates to the recent collective agreement settlement that we had from 2015 through 2018. Those costs now show up in the fire service. Previously, we had provided for those in our provisions area of the budget. So it's really a shifting again of the budget. Our police service requests that you'll deal with later on in the budget process, they're asking for an additional $390,000. Public works request, something you probably noticed in the budget, is down significantly, about $870,000. The reason it's down, there's a number of factors. First of all, was the implementation of the design team that council recently approved. So those design team salaries are now charged to our capital. As well, what we did is we allocated our engineering technologists to capital as well. Previously, what we had done is charge those into our operating budget, and then we charged overhead on all of our capital projects. We actually charged about $450,000 in overhead. So what we've done is eliminated that. We want to move towards sort of away from overhead as a percentage allocation and go to direct costs, because it's much more accurate, much more easier to apply, and also for everyone to understand. So although it looks like a large shift, there is some offset to that. And then the other major one, by far the majority of that public works decrease is in the elimination of automated speed enforcement costs, about $550,000. And what that is we used to have to pay all of the costs associated with automated speed enforcement. We don't now. So again, we've taken that out of the budget. Parks and recreation expenditures are up about $196,000. A lot of that relates to utility costs, water costs, some of our power and energy costs. Yara Centers now appears in the city budget. You will see that on that summary page. For $714,000 is the budgeted expenditures. The good news on that, in the revenue side, you'll see revenues of $648,000. So that's a recovery rate of over 90% for that facility. Certainly in terms of our recreation facilities, that would be by far the highest recovery rate. And my understanding in the future is we may even be able to make it a little bit better than that. So that's a very positive facility for the city and the community. And it shows that some of those facilities certainly can pay their way in terms of their overall costs, which is good. Provisions, miscellaneous debt is up about $66,000. And again, some of the things in there are salary provisions. So all of the salary provisions for collective agreements that we have under negotiation, we would have an estimate in there. So you see it in that area. Also, what's important to note in that area is that 1% allocation of municipal tax revenue to the capital funding for recreation and facilities that the city manager mentioned is also in there. So it overall is an increase. Also part of the operating budget is the transit service. If you look at that chart of the overall summary of that department, there are a few trends occurring in there, and we prepared a chart on this next slide. As you can see, overall our subsidies are approaching $1.5 million. That's for the paratransit and the regular transit service. Unfortunately, our revenues are decreasing. This is 2019 to 2020 budget by about $116,000, and our expenditures are going up. At the end of the day, our subsidy is up about $245,000. So that's a subsidy increase from 65% of our expenditures to 73%. And our revenues are decreasing in both of those. So it probably highlights for all of us that that's an area that's going to require further study and review in terms of how we can maybe reverse some of those trends in terms of our revenue decreases, and also continue to provide that service to the community. This is a chart we try to prepare every year as a comparison of expenditure growth to CPI. And as you can see, for 2020, we're projecting CPI 2% and our overall expenditure growth to be 3.25%. One of the things you have to remember, though, included in that 3.25% is that $295,000, that 1% of municipal taxation we've spoken about is in there. So that's an allocation to capital. If you were to strip that out of there, it actually would reduce it by about 0.6%. So the increase in expenditures just for the operating budget is about 2.65%. One of the things too is we often compare, I guess, the growth in expenditures we should have at the city in terms of CPI, and it's not always the best measure of that. And one of the things some communities do, City of Edmonton is a good example. They actually go and produce a municipal CPI. And I've done a little bit of research in terms of that. Their projection of municipal CPI for 2020 is actually about 3.15%. So our overall increase in expenditures is in line with that. And the reason that's higher than CPI is there's factors that the city would face that aren't in that basket of goods that are in the CPI and vice versa. So overall, I think we're in line with cost of living increases in terms of the costs to provide those services. I'd like to talk a little bit now about the general capital budget. This chart is a little small, but it gives you an overview of our general capital reserve. And as you can see, in 2020, we have a balanced fund at the end of the day. It's about $388,000. That includes that $295,000 additional that we're recommending for Parks and Recreation funding is there. So if you were to approve those projects, we would still have a balance at the end of 2020. Unfortunately, you can see in 2021, we do run into a significant deficit. That's really caused by a major project in our transportation area, where there's rehabilitation of one of our bridge structures. It's about a $7.6 million project. That's something obviously we're going to have to address in terms of funding. Hope would be there's some federal provincial funding for that type of project, and we'll have to look at other ways of being able to fund that. But that's the major one that throws the overall capital expenditure reserve into a deficit. As you can see, if we didn't have that project in 2021, we'd probably actually be in a small surplus position as well. So just continuing on, I wanted to talk a little bit about the expenditure pressures. As you can see, in terms of the general capital budget, if you go back to 2015, you can see our expenditures were significantly lower. The city had sort of taken the approach of doing the expenditures that were necessary, but sort of not looking forward to the future in terms of what needed to be done. Unfortunately, you can see once we got into the 2016 and onward periods, our expenditures have gone up significantly, especially in our transportation area. A lot of additional dollars have been put into our streets and roads that certainly needed repair and fixing. So one of the areas I would draw note to, and one of the reasons there is that additional 1% being proposed for parks and recreation, as you can see, pretty flat across that whole area. There hasn't been a significant increase. And really, it's a lot like what we were doing before in terms of our streets and roads and some of our other areas. Is we were doing the sort of minimum expenditures to keep it going and keep it running. But reality is with our facilities is we're going to get to the point in time where we're going to see those costs spike. No different than we are with distribution mains and those sorts of things. So we're trying to be proactive and identify the need to invest more money in those areas. Our general capital revenues, just wanted to touch on our major revenues that we have for our general capital budget. So our SBC funds are about $15.5 million, which is significant. So that is the 10% municipal surcharge that SaskPower levies on all power consumed in Moose Jaw. One thing to know with that, though, that is a significant decrease from what we used to receive. We used to receive also from SaskPower a grant in lieu portion, which was about a third of that monies. And I went back to 2016, the last time we received that. 2016, the allocation to the capital budget was actually $21.5 million. So that was part of those reductions in 2017. And we still see that impact on our capital budget. That deficit you saw, if we removed the major bridge work out of that, we were in a deficit of $6 or $7 million at the end of that 5-year capital plan. Well, a lot of it is this SBC monies that we lost that we still haven't been able to make up. Federal provincial funding, there's a small portion in here, about $900,000 of ISIP monies that is going in. Obviously, we'd like to see more federal provincial funding flow into the general capital reserve. Taxation revenue, there's about $5.6 million. In terms of our capital expenditure fund interest, there's about $12.5 million. That's up from what it has been in the past, and that's based upon our expected returns in terms of our investment portfolio. So plays a significant contribution to that overall fund in terms of funding our various transportation and parks and recreational needs. Land sale proceeds, there's about $6 million allocated to the general capital revenues. And parks dedication, just a small sliver of money, about $119,000. Our Sask Energy surcharge, if you recall, when that was restored, I believe it was 2018, council made the decision to direct that to the general capital reserve. And again, that forms a significant contribution to our annual expenditures. So overall, our total estimated revenues are about $45.5 million. In terms of expenditures, our transportation area by far takes up the largest chunk of funding, about $40.7 million. Our parks and recreation area, about 5.5. Other services, about 8.85. Our protective services, 362,000, and our storm sewers, about 3.7. So overall expenditures are about $59 million. Just a little more detail on some of those. You can see in our transportation area that 42.793 million includes the uncompleted works. The largest portion by far is for paved roadways. We have $18 million planned in expenditures over the 5-year period. Sidewalks, 2.8 million. Traffic control, 3.5. Structure upgrades, as I mentioned, the one major one we have in there, but overall 15.2 million. So there's a number of very significant contributions to our transportation area. In terms of parks and recreation, this one's really almost a kaleidoscope of colors. Lots and lots of projects, not that much funding. You can see parks and recreation is really responsible for a whole host of areas. So it's all of our facilities maintenance, it's cemetery improvements, it's pathways, it's reforestation, it's energy management, some special needs upgrades, all of our facilities. So overall, you can see there's a very large mandate there of projects and needs for funding. And we're trying to address an almost overwhelming number of projects with a little bit of funding for each one. Other services, this one to me always looks like a giant Pac-Man trying to eat the last 2 slices. The good point with this is, though, the Pac-Man is getting smaller. The multiplex loan repayments are actually decreasing. At the end of 2020, or I believe it's in September of 2020, that actually the first portion of our loan, which was the loan in respect to the fundraising portion that we had borrowed, will be repaid. So that is gone and out of the way. We just have the remaining loan that we did for the rest of the multiplex project. As well, you'll see in there a new project is solar initiatives for 1.225 million. We're actually going to receive a major portion of that in ISIP funding, about 73% of that. 800 and some thousand dollars we will receive in ISIP funding. And that's a project that has some very positive returns for the city in terms of it will reduce our energy costs, and we'll see benefits in the future in terms of operating savings. So some positives to that one. So that's it for the general capital. I just wanted to talk a little bit about our equipment reserve budget. So we've had an equipment reserve for more than 60 years at the city. And the purpose of the equipment reserve is to provide a vehicle to ensure that we have funds in place when it's time to replace a piece of equipment. The benefits of the equipment reserve, the biggest one by far is the ability to save for future purchases and earn investment income. By doing that, the overall contribution is less than if you had not saved for it. Also, if you had not saved for that equipment replacement, you would in all likelihood have to borrow the money. Your costs go up significantly then. It's not a case of earning interest on funds that you set aside. Now it's a case of having to pay interest to someone for funds you don't have. Dedicates funding to equipment, so we aren't into a competition in terms of our capital works program. What you find with most communities is equipment doesn't fare very well when it comes to capital works. When it comes to fixing your water mains or buying a new garbage truck, usually the water mains would win. So by having a dedicated reserve, it certainly makes us able to replace our equipment, have up-to-date equipment, and by having up-to-date equipment, we can perform our program and service at the level that it needs to be performed at. That's an overall summary of the equipment reserve. You can see the overall ask for 2020 is 3.85 million. That is a significant ask. Largest reason for that is the engineering area is about 2.5 million of that. Council will recall that's really the first major request for equipment replacement in engineering since 2017. So we're doing a bit of catch up in 2020, and then you'll see it sort of flattens out other years after that. One of the things too I draw your attention to is we will be using about $775,000 of control account money. So that's excess depreciation we've accumulated on equipment that we accumulate in our control account, and we have it for new purchases of new equipment or where we have shortfalls. So we're able to utilize some of those monies we've set aside. I'd also like to move on now to the utility operating budget. First slide is just an overview of our waterworks area. You can see overall it's almost $12 million utility in terms of revenue and expenditures. Unfortunately, we do have some significant cost pressures. We're seeing a number of areas where the costs are going up. And as a result, we're requesting council to consider a 6% rate increase, as well as the implementation of the infrastructure levy. So some of those costs we're seeing going up significantly are production costs. Our major component of that cost is the cost of water from the Buffalo Pound Water Treatment Plant. Buffalo Pound, as you're aware, is facing significant capital upgrades as well in the near future. And what they're doing is stepping their rates up to be able to fund that. So we've incorporated that into our budget overall. You can see those are not insignificant increases. In 2016, our production costs were about $2 million. By 2023, we're projecting they're going to be in about the $4.2 million range. So significant increase. Also, distribution costs have gone up very significantly as well. 2016, they were about $3 million, and they've risen now to the point where they're actually about $4.5 million in 2020. Biggest component of those distribution costs are water main repair costs. This is a chart from 2010 till 2019 of our water main repair costs. As you can see, in 2010, we were sort of merrily going along. It was about $400,000 a year. In 2014, we had a very major spike in terms of our overall costs for water main repairs. And that really got us focused on a cast iron water main replacement program. Unfortunately, we're still in the early stages of that, so we're continuing to see that trend go upwards in terms of our costs. That's an area where we're hoping in the next couple of years we will see that start to reverse and start to come down, and that will have a significant benefit for the utility. Because the reality is right now, the reserve contributions, so that's in effect the operating profit that we make on that utility that we direct to our capital funding, as you can see, has gone down and continues to go down significantly. And that's because of all those increased costs, especially in terms of distribution mains. Right now, I believe for 2019, we're projecting just the water main repair costs to be about $2.2 million. So we're hoping that is going to reverse itself. We're sure it will actually, and we'll have additional contributions as we go forward. Our next utility is sanitary sewer. You can see it's about $8.9 million utility. Bit of a different story in terms of it. Its costs are much more stable in terms of increases year over year. And the overall profit that we make on the operating portion, you can see is significantly more than water, about $4.5 million. And we're able to contribute that to our capital needs of the utility. And actually that utility is a self-sustaining utility in that the rates that we're generating are able to fund the capital needs of that utility. For 2020, we're requesting council to consider a 5% rate increase. Solid waste is our third utility at the city. It's about a $5 million utility in terms of revenues and expenses. Again, a few years ago, council decided to make that a totally self-funded utility. So we charge landfill fees, we charge for garbage collection, we charge for recycling. So that utility is generating all of the revenue it needs to be able to function and also pay for its capital needs. So it will be able to pay for the capital needs in terms of a landfill replacement from the revenues we're generating. Good news for that utility for 2020 is we don't foresee any need for rate increases. The last area I wanted to talk a little bit about was just the utility capital. And for the 2020 to 2024 budget, you can see by far the largest capital need is in our waterworks area, about $79 million in new spending. Our sanitary sewer area, about $29 million. And then our solid waste area has about $11.3 million, and that's for the landfill. Overall, you add those together, over $119 million in proposed capital expenditures for our three utilities. Just in a little detail on each one of those, the water utility reserve. So this is really a cash flow overview of that utility. You can see the contributions we're generating each year come from a variety of sources, and I'll talk about those in a little bit. We do foresee the need to borrow $15 million in 2020 to be able to have the cash flow to do all of the projects we need. And as you can see, there's still a significant amount of capital works that are required to be done in that utility. So in terms of our utility capital budgets, this is a chart very similar again to the other ones I've shown you this evening in terms of our capital expenditures. You can see again in 2015, our capital expenditures were minimal. They were more of a just keep things running, keep things going sort of mentality. Once we got into the 2016 period, our capital expenditures have gone up significantly. Waterworks continue to be a high demand, as you can see right through that 2016-2020 period. Some of the better news is in terms of the other utilities, sanitary sewer has very much leveled off in terms of its needs. And once we look beyond 2020, they actually start to go down significantly. So, and solid waste, that orange bar you see in there is the landfill replacement. Once that occurs, we won't have another major capital expenditure for that utility for some time. So in terms of waterworks capital revenues, I just wanted to touch on some of the major revenues of the utility. So over the 5-year period, utility revenues are going to generate about $23.5 million. Gas tax funding, we've directed about $10.5 million to the utility. Federal provincial funding, about 18.3. A portion of that we've already been approved for in terms of the ISIP funding for the programs that are underway. We are also hopeful that we will receive funding for the water reservoir pump house project that we have. That's a $16 million project. If we're successful in that, we'll receive about $11 million in federal provincial funding. So very significant. That's accounted for in the overall budget. Municipal taxation, we're directing a very significant amount of municipal taxation over 5 years, about $14.5 million. And then the proposed infrastructure levy, about $8.4 million, would also impact the utility. One of the things we foresee with the sanitary sewer utility, once its debt is paid in 2023, there's likely the opportunity to amalgamate the waterworks and sanitary sewer utilities into one utility. There appears there will be excess contribution available there that could be directed to waterworks, and we've denoted $3 million. So that would be $3 million a year. That's actually just the first year of the plan would be in 2024. There would be those monies to allocate. So it's an ability to merge those utilities and be able to have a larger funding source, essentially, to fund some of our issues. Proposed infrastructure levy. I just wanted to sort of give a bit of a history in terms of this. So city administration is recommending a levy of $100 on the same basis as the hospital levy, and you've had a report that is referred that we will deal with later on that. The levy is necessary to provide for a portion of the cast iron program funding. As many of you will recall, the original budget was $5.85 million. Municipal taxation was to make up a little over 1.5 million of that. The local improvement levy was a little over 1.6. The contribution from the utility itself, so the fees that it charges, was 2.25 million, and utility savings were about 480,000. We're still waiting for the utility savings. Once we do a few more years of replacements, we would expect to see that. So after the referendum on the local improvement levy, there's a shortfall of that 1.608 million because that local improvement levy, we've never identified a source of funding for that. It was going to be through a local improvement. That obviously disappeared. So that's still a funding need of that utility. Council did, I believe in 2018, pass a motion that we would transition the hospital levy into an infrastructure levy for that exact purpose, to replace that 1.608 million. This council has wanted further information on that, and you're considering how you're going to address that need for the utility. But it is a shortfall in that program, and overall it's a shortfall in funding for that utility. So in terms of our waterworks utility, what we're spending our money on, you can see by far the largest component of our expenditures is the cast iron program. In this 5-year capital plan, there's almost $40 million dedicated to cast iron water main replacement. Both 2020 and 2021 have some significant programs, $9.9 million each. We are able to tap into our ISIP federal provincial funding to raise that to that level. So there will be some very significant work done on that in the community. Also, a major component of the utility, unfortunately, is debt. Principal and interest repayments. We already have $30 million in debt for that utility. We're anticipating the need for another $15 million in this capital plan, so it starts to become a major portion of the overall costs. And you can see the rest of the monies we're planning to spend as well. So our sanitary sewer utility, again, this is a cash flow model for this utility. Difference from the water is all of these contributions are coming from the utility fees generated by the utility. And as you can see, they're sufficient to pay the capital needs of that utility. The end of the 2024 period, we end up with a surplus of $2.8 million. One thing you will note there is over that period of time, we do go into a deficit position. That's where we utilize our other reserves to do just sort of short-term self-funding. So we don't go out and borrow those monies or source those monies. We just utilize basically our cash flows and our reserves to be able to do that. And you'll see that in a number of the utilities. That's what we do in terms of shorter terms borrowing needs is we don't go to market and borrow monies. We simply use our cash flows to be able to do that. So in terms of the sanitary sewer utility, this chart shows you what the projected expenditures are for. There's some major monies being spent on our sanitary sewer mains in terms of improvements. There's about $3.9 million for wastewater treatment plant, $11.4 million for lift stations, and the wastewater loan repayments are about $5.3 million. As I mentioned, in 2023, those loan payments will be repaid and we'll no longer have that chunk of the pie overall. So our solid waste utility, last utility we have, again, you can see overall its cash flow. We're in a positive position now. At the end of the 5-year period, we're in a slight deficit position, but the utility itself is generating from the charges it has and the revenue it generates sufficient funds to fund its capital needs. The $10 million for the landfill replacement, it will be able to fund that. There is some short-term self-financing that we're doing in terms of that utility, but overall it will be positive in terms of the money that's spent. And that's just a chart of the overall expenditures for that utility. So, in summary, the resulting budget requests for 2020 are, our general operating budget request is just over $50 million. The general capital budget request for new spending for 2020 is $10.4 million. The equipment reserve budget request for new spending for 2020 is $3.85 million. Utility operating budget request is about $25.8 million. The utility capital budget request for 2020 is $32.5 million. So a total spending request in these preliminary budgets is $122,731,620. So what that means to our average homeowner, a 1.02% municipal tax increase for operating, that's $1.24 a month. A 1% municipal tax increase is being proposed for the general capital budget for contribution to recreation and parks and facilities capital needs is $1.22 per month. A 6% waterworks utility rate increase is $3.64 a month. A 5% sanitary sewer utility rate increase is $2.45 a month. And the infrastructure levy we're suggesting is $7.08 for a total of $15.63 a month. Just sort of framing that in a little bit different manner in terms of the annual impact. So annually, that's $187.56 for the average homeowner. The average homeowner pays $1,480 in municipal taxes, $725 in water, $590 in sewer, $200 in solid waste fees, for a total of $2,995. At $187.56 is a 6.26% increase. If you remove the infrastructure levy out of that, it's actually a 3.44% increase for all of those. The reason I removed the infrastructure levy is, obviously, we had a hospital levy in the past. The intent was to transition that into an infrastructure levy. So to a large degree, that is something that had been levied. But regardless, that gives you a perspective of what we're asking the members of our community to fund in terms of our budgets. So next steps in the budget process. As administration, we would ask that you table this communication. It has the finalizing motions for the budget in there. So if you would table those, and then we would lift that from the table at the end of the process. We would ask as well that you work your way through the new reports that are on the agenda this evening. There are some reports that have just recently been added to that agenda. We certainly wouldn't expect you to make any decisions on those, but you may want to have the people that are here this evening present those. It will at least give you the information on those, but certainly those can be made at a later point. And that's true of any of these reports. Certainly council doesn't need to make a decision. If you're not comfortable at this point, you can certainly table any of them. There's also a number of referred reports. So those are matters you've referred in terms of infrastructure levy, recycling fees, that sort of thing that you will need to work your way through. And then sort of once we get through that, we would see an opportunity for council to request any additional information or presentations. One of the areas we would suggest that you probably have a little deeper look at would be the capital budget. And at the next meeting, we would be prepared to have our parks engineering areas give you an overview of those. That's an area of the budget that does change fairly significantly from year to year, the projects we're doing and that sort of thing. So it probably, if council feels there's value in that, that's something we certainly could provide you at the beginning of our next budget meeting. Some of our other budget areas in terms of operating budget, we haven't set out a time to go through a detailed presentation of each area. The rationale for that is really what's presented in the budget document is a status quo budget. You've seen that 4 times already. Certainly if you want to see it again, we can present it. But for the most part, anything that's new in the budget, you have a report before you. So obviously, once we get near the end of the process, council as well can make any changes that you feel appropriate. Certainly there'll be those opportunities there to do that. And then the final step in the process would be to lift this report that I'm suggesting you table this evening. There's a number of finalizing motions in that, and we would finalize the budget. We have 3 meeting times set aside this evening, December 4th and 11th. And we're hopeful that that will be enough time for council to make the decisions they need to make and to have a budget approved by the end of the year. If we do have a budget approved by the end of the year, it's a tremendous bonus to the city in terms of being able to get ahead of our overall capital works programs, our operating programs, and deliver them starting January 1st, which is very positive. So that's the end of my presentation. Just before I open it up for questions from administrations or comments that council wants to make, I just wanted to take a moment to thank everybody involved in the budget process. And that ranges from council for the input that we've received in terms of input from council to be able to prepare this budget. Certainly all of the directors have worked very closely with the finance department to prepare the budget, have been very responsive to our requests. So it's been a pleasure working with them, pleasure working with their staff. Again, they've all been very, very quick to respond and provide us with the information we needed. And I'd also like to thank the people in finance that have been involved. This is a totally new reworked budget, something we're very proud of and we put a lot of work into. So I want to thank them as well. With that, we would open it up for any questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Acker. Okay, so I guess, are there any questions? I think it's as a matter of process, opportunity for questions. And then I think administration is looking for us to table this report pending the other items on the agenda. So questions or comments? Okay, Councillor Swanson.
I guess I'm the only one that has any questions, so I have a few actually. The new crew for water line repair, where would they fit into the budget?
Mr. Acker?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, through you to Councillor Swanson. The majority of those costs are in the waterworks utility. A small portion are in the sanitary sewer. So they're in the operating portion of those.
And you had mentioned the difficulties with repair, because I remember 3 years ago sitting in that room there where administration was trying to budget that money from decreased costs of water line repair. And I made the point it was very premature to do so. And I think it's still premature to be talking about, when we are experiencing this year the record number of breaks, it's premature to be talking about the reduction in those expenses, because not meeting our program goals in terms of replacement. And as the majority of the cast iron we're replacing was laid between 1911 and 1915 with a life expectancy of 80 years, we're well past that. So the breakdown rate on that is going to be much higher than with normal. So I had cautioned 3 years ago, and I still have trouble believing that. And I just point out last year, the budget for distribution repair, or distribution of the water, which includes repair, was 4 million. And it was actually 4.8 million. And what happens is that reduces the amount of money that goes into the reserve, as the finance director was pointing out. So there was $900,000 less went into the reserve for fixing the system than was budgeted. And last year there was 3 million budgeted to go into the reserve. And this year, 2.4 million, a $600,000 reduction in the reserve requirement. And I would suggest to you that is why the water rate increase is only 6%, when a few years ago we were projecting 15% rate increases down the line. And so I think we have a bit of an artificial reality there with respect to the water system, in that graph showing the increase in cost for water system repairs is going up significantly. And what we're doing is we're just, at the same time we're pleading poverty on the capital side, we're reducing the budgeted contribution to the water utility reserve, which I don't think is really what we should be doing. Secondly, and I ask if we could get the graph again about showing the municipal tax levy. It was right near the beginning. And it was mentioned that it's good that this is going up. From 2008 to 2020, an increase of taxes collected from the property tax base in Moose Jaw of over 40%. But what that graph, there's really two components to that. And it would be helpful to have that broken down. One component is assessment growth. The other component is tax increases. And it would be very interesting for us to have a 10-year history of the assessment growth as opposed to the tax increases. Because in 2008, the population of Moose Jaw is basically the same as it is now. But we've increased our take off that property tax base and those people by 40%. And I'm going to suggest that a smallest component of that increase is assessment growth. And nowhere, you know, that's one thing that it doesn't get brought up, is the ability to pay. We can make all the case for how we need all this more money, but nowhere do we hear about the ability to pay. And I think that particularly becomes relevant when we talk about the commercial assessment. And it was categorized as lost assessment. And I would beg to differ with that categorization of what happened with the commercial tax base. It wasn't lost assessment. It was assessment that was found to be improperly levied. And those commercial taxpayers appealed their assessments. And significant amounts found to be correct. that their taxes were improperly assessed based on the Board of Revision review and any appeals that went to the province. So it wasn't lost assessment. It was assessment that was improperly assessed. And it's mentioned how the gap between commercial and residential is down a few basis points, but I can remember for like 15 years in a row, it was the administration recommendation that was taken up by council to increase that, particularly with the imposition of the most absurd possible policy to make every commercial property pay 5% more in case some people successfully appealed their taxes. And I would ask administration, what is the total value of the commercial assessment, commercial revenues for taxation?
Mr. Acker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, through you to Councillor Swanson. So total assessment in terms of commercial is about 20% of our taxable assessment. That area generates about 32% of our tax revenue.
So 32% of 25 million?
Yes. A little over 9.
A million. Of which 1.8 million is money that is being picked up by the remaining property taxpayers because of successful appeals. Almost 20% of the commercial tax is made up of a surcharge to cover off the improper assessments. And I would urge you to speak to commercial property owners in Moose Jaw and feel if they're able to sustain more of that burden. And when it comes time to set tax policy, I sure hope we don't impose a 5% surcharge on every commercial property to cover off the appeal losses. It's a punishing tax on people that they have to pick up what would have been derived from improper assessments. The Director of Finance mentioned the municipal cost, the municipal inflation rate. And I have, with some bemusement, watched the development of this in recent years, where municipalities have come up with, well, we shouldn't be subject to the same scrutiny as ordinary inflation numbers because we're municipalities. But bear in mind that the definition of inflation is the increase in the cost of goods and services. Services being labor. And as we saw, 58% of our costs are labor. So what we're trying to say is we should somehow get a break on being measured against inflation because we have higher costs than everybody else. When we buy paper, pencils, computer programs, fuel, but our biggest component is labor. And that is where municipal governments tend to be the most generous relative to other things. So I don't buy for a second that we should be subject to a different standard for inflation, the municipal rate of inflation. My second last point is with respect to the infrastructure levy. Is there going to be a report to us on that?
Mr. Acker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Councillor Swanson. You have referred a report. We had done one in September and you referred that to budget. So,
and at that time, I believe Councillor Warren was asking for further information. And I, at that time, also asked if we could get how other municipalities do that. Do we have that information?
Yes, I did remember that. I do have that information. I can provide it to you.
That will be presented to us when we discuss that.
Yeah, I can do it when we discuss it. But
that's
yes,
fine. Thank you. And my last point is with respect to the portrayal of what this would cost for the average house or the average taxpayer in Moose Jaw. And I note in the report, it doesn't put that caveat on it. It just says, oh, per month it's this. And so I'm thinking, well, if I own a commercial property somewhere, I'm only going to go up $1.29 a month. But that's not the case. We're referring to an average taxpayer. And I think the report should have included that qualification on it. And when you determine average, is that 50% of the houses are below that and 50% are above?
Mr. Acker?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So that's our average assessed value for single-family dwellings, and we take that and work out what the tax rate would be for that. In terms of our water and sewer utility, it would be for the average consumption.
So when we talk about the average homeowner paying $1,480 municipal tax, that means 50% pay less and 50% pay more?
I certainly don't have the median and the mode on that because that would be different in terms of the average. It's an average. So there could very well be more or less on one side or the other, but it would be the average assessment that is used to generate that.
Well, when it's being sold to us, it's not very much really. For the average homeowner, the tax increase this year will be 8.7% on the municipal side, not counting water and sewer. The hospital levy concluded last year at $15. So the imposition of a $100 levy plus the other increases, $129 on a $1,480 municipal tax is 8.7%. So when I hear the word modest, I think that's in the subject to personal opinion, but 8.7% is not a modest increase. So those were the points I wanted to make about the discussion. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Swanson. I just wondered if we get some clarification on one of the comments you made, Councillor Swanson, just about the lost tax revenue. I think it was mentioned that commercial properties contribute about $9 million towards the taxation on an annual basis. The 1.7 million in lost revenue was equal to about 20%, but that lost revenue was over a 6-year period, 2013 to 2019. So it's not I guess clarification, is that correct, Mr. Acker? That
well, I would point out it's still being paid.
Right, but it wasn't 20%. The commercial property owners aren't making up 20% in a single year.
Over that period of time, that's been the cumulative impact of that. One thing to keep in mind with that, though, that is no different than a revaluation year. We remain revenue neutral overall as a city. So if we collect $25 million in taxes, regardless of what assessment changes, we still collect $25 million in taxes. That's the same logic for the commercial sector, is even though we're having those losses in assessment, we're not saying, oh, we've just lost that money. We're asking that sector overall to generate that money. Because at the end of the day, if we knew what those assessment values were before they were issued out in the community, if we knew what those losses would be, we would generate the money we need for the city to operate. So it's a little bit of a looking in a mirror thing in terms of saying it's loss. Overall, we expect to generate this much money. We have an assessment base we have to generate it on.
And if I might,
Sure.
To me, that's absurd. Because if you have 100 businesses and you expect to get 10 million from those 100 businesses, but you then go down to 70 business and you say, well, we still got to get $10 million from that commercial sector. Taxation is based on the value assigned to your property. And the idea that we have this fixed number that a certain percentage must come from commercial and a certain percentage must come from residential has been punishing on the commercial sector of Moose Jaw.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Swanson. Councillor McMahon.
Thank you. I just have a few questions on a couple areas that I couldn't find the explanations in there. So first of all, I guess, so you did talk originally or initially about the subsidy in the transit area with busing. And a couple of years ago, I know we had a presentation to us that we had hoped that if we reduced our bus fares substantially, that would increase our ridership substantially, and that didn't work that way. And I just wonder, have we considered increasing those bus fares? I know we had some discussion after one of the quarterly reports, and I was a bit surprised that it didn't appear that we had, but.
Mr. Puffault.
I think that's still coming, Councillor McMahon. As you recall, we're doing a complete review of the transit system for the end of the year, and we'll be able to present back to council early in next year.
Okay, thank you. I couldn't find in any of the information that we've been presented yet sort of a schedule of our total reserves. And I'm wondering if that's something that we will be getting at some point.
Yeah, we provide that every year as part of the audited financial statements. If you recall, I believe last year our total reserves totaled about $107 million.
But it's not going to be part of any budget information.
It's usually something we compile at the end of the year because there's fluctuations obviously through the year that would tend to make it not as accurate. It's a fairly stable figure. In 2017, I believe it was 115 million. Last year it was 107. We would expect it to be in a similar range.
Okay. And part of the reason I asked, I guess, is and I should have asked this many moons ago, I think, because I've noticed it before. But for example, the schedule you provide for us on the land development reserve shows a deficit of $5.2 million at the end of the year. Whereas when we got the statements in midsummer, our land reserve was actually about $22 million. So I'm struggling how that schedule showing that as a deficit.
That is just a cash flow statement. So that doesn't have the opening balance of the reserve and the closing. It's a cash flow statement and it's only reflective of the capital projects we've initiated in about the last 7 years. Prior to that, we actually didn't sort of track land development separately. So we don't have all the past history where we made that 18 or 20 million dollars. So that's what you're not seeing in that cash flow statement. And we just unfortunately don't have that information to produce that for that particular reserve.
Because even with some of the utility reserve schedules were sort of similar, like those balances aren't reflected in those schedules. Is that sort of the same?
So as an example for waterworks, as an example, that would be the reserve balance that's estimated at the start of the year. So that you would see if that, it's an estimate obviously because it's budget, but you would see that in the reserves. When we list our reserves, you would see that as one of our reserves. So there is a one-to-one relationship.
Okay. I noticed on page 10 of the report that we're anticipating $100,000 additional revenue in building permits. And I'm just trying to wrap my head around, are we expecting quite a rash of building compared to previous? Like last year we projected 2.25 and it looks like we're going to hit 150 and we budgeted 250 this year. So it just seems jumped out at me as perhaps.
Administration?
Yes, thank you. Certainly next year, there's some major projects on the line. SAS Power, the build, that's a building permit that we're able to charge for. So when they start construction next year, that'll be part of the value that we'll be able to accumulate from building permits. As you call, that's a fairly massive building permit for us.
So some of those are probably originally budgeted for this year and just didn't happen. Is that?
Yeah, and I don't believe that we budgeted for SAS Power for this year because as you know, this only came to our attention in December of last year. We were already partially through the budget. So, and really unknown if we were proceeding at that time. So I don't believe we budgeted anything for SAS Power last year. And this year there's a couple of other projects that are forthcoming.
Okay. I didn't do a lot of analysis, but that you had mentioned that the sanitary utility is pretty much self-sustaining at this point. So begs the question, why are we bumping it 5%? To me, it does anyway. And especially when we've got all these other increases, if that one doesn't necessarily need that.
Thank you, Chair. Through you to Councillor McMahon. It's self-sustaining with that 5% rate increase. We're still projecting the need for 5% rate increases over that 5-year period. It, like anything in the city, is still facing cost increases. I mean, the cost to do business goes up every year, 2 or 3%. So that's certainly covering a portion of that. And it still has debt to pay. It's still paying off that debt. The reason it becomes sustainable is once that debt is paid in 2023, we're in a very sustainable position with that. If it was not for debt ending, we would still be requiring rate increases beyond that.
So are you suggesting it's going to be 5% per year then? Or in that neighborhood?
Yes, the model that we've developed for the 5-year period would be 5% rate increases through the 5-year period, yes.
Okay. if we're going, I had a question around traffic control, but if we're going to get that presentation next time, I'll leave it till then. My last question then, just, we've got a fairly substantial budgeted increase for doubtful allowances for waterworks, and I'm just wondering if we're not going after them as often as, or how do we gone up 40,000 or 35,000?
Thank you, Chair. Through you to Councillor McMahon. Yes, there has been a significant increase. We have not changed our practices. If anything, we've increased them in terms of collections. I think it's a reality, unfortunately, in our community right now is some of our homeowners are having a very difficult time paying those, and that's why it's gone up. And so we've made a provision for not being able to collect some of those.
Okay, thank you. I think that was all I had. Oh, just one last question. We did, a month or two ago, there was a change in how we authorized the acting pay to kick in at 11 days versus 2 days. And I assumed that would make a bit of a small dent in the salary costs. And has that been factored into the budget?
Mr. Acker.
Thank you, Chair. Through you to Councillor McMahon. No, that was just approved last, actually, a couple days ago. So no, it is not reflected in the budget. I'm not sure it's that significant. A lot of the significant portion of that TPHD, for lack of a better word, was the longer term ones in that analysis you received. A lot of that would have been the longer term replacements. Those are still there. There would be a small change, but I don't know it's all that material, and we haven't had an opportunity to calculate that at this point.
All right, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor McMahon. Mayor Tomey.
Yep, thank you very much. Just a matter of process with regards to the library submission. I believe that there was a change that night. And so if we're going to be voting on this, do I have the old one or do I have the new one in my binder or everybody else's binder?
Mr. Acker.
What you referred was the old one. We did provide you with a motion guide. It would have the correct figure.
Okay, thank you very much. And then the other question comment I have was, I believe it was 2017 budget that we voted on the VoIP process. I want to see where we're at because I thought there were some savings with that was supposed to be implemented. And I'm just wondering how quickly we will be able to realize those savings.
Administration.
Yes, thank you. VoIP unfortunately got pushed to the bottom of the queue with some of these other high priority projects like payroll and such, but we have already started picking it up. It is top priority for 2020, and we've actually started working on it last month. Ahead of that because it is previously approved, and 100% agree there is a lot of cost savings, probably even more than what we put in the budget there. And also easier communication comes along with VoIP, not just cost savings. So it is now a priority. It won't be kicked to the bottom of the list, and we are actively working on it, and it will be done by next year.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mayor Tomey. Councillor Swanson.
Thank you.
Just didn't keep it. I'll move on past Councillor Eby if you want to click in. Okay, Councillor Eby, I guess, did your thing come up?
Yep.
Okay, if you want to proceed, Councillor Swanson will go after you.
Okay.
Thanks.
I don't have anything too major. I've got a lot of notes made to ask as we go along through other pieces, but I just wanted to highlight that I think the Yara Center revenues and the rate of recovery is a really good news story coming out of decisions that were made earlier. I, for one, was skeptical about that when that first became part of the city Parks and Rec department. And so I think that's very promising. And I do think that Mr. Acker's comment that shows that maybe other recreational facilities could have similar changes is good news for us. And I kudos to the Parks and Rec director and his staff for making those changes and that successful. It brings me though to a question of the Mosaic Place budget then. So with the implementation now of Spectra, so going forward, say in 2021, is it still just a line item or do we ever see a budget from Spectra? I sort of thought that was a part of the deal.
Mr. Pufalt?
They're still working on a budget, so what we've done for now is presented or used our budget that was forwarded to council earlier this year. So it maintains the subsidy level that we had proposed for 2020 from 2019. If we're able to do better, great, but at this point in time, they're still working hard trying to get the budget figured out. And as you know, we had things going on, certainly a
But I'm
large
just-
concert on Friday night, which was awesome show. So yeah, they're working on a budget and will soon be presented to council.
So going forward, we will see numbers from Spectra and from what they're asking for. Okay, thank you. Well, this is, I guess, it gets capital budget, but just when I look at the Parks and Rec kaleidoscope of projects, the term that came to my mind was it's a lick and a promise is really all that we're doing to with the capital projects for Parks and Rec. So when it comes time, I am in favor of the 1% recreation and Parks and Recreation levy so that we can begin to try to do some of that work that needs to be done and not just put Band-Aids on things. And again, we will eventually end up in a situation with those facilities, how we've ended up in the situation with our underground infrastructure. And I don't want to be a part of that. So, and the levy, I know we're going to have a bigger discussion about that later on. And I've got lots of comments about that, but I'm just not completely sure if we're looking at an $85 levy or a $100 levy. Some places I see 85 in the documents and some places I see 100 and I'm thinking I'm losing my mind. So can someone clarify that, please?
Thank you, Chair. Through you to Councillor Eby. You're not losing your mind. We did have a couple of instances. What we're referring to, overall, it's a $100 levy. We talk of 85 because we already have a $15 levy.
Oh, so we're
85 's the increase.
increasing it. Okay.
Yeah.
It was not worded, sorry, very clearly.
No, we would certainly apologize for that confusion. We were just trying in terms of costing to show the additional cost is only 85.
And I also wondered about the transit fares, and I think it was me who brought it up originally at quarterly reports that perhaps we need to be looking at reverting back, but that's fine. I know that's coming. Also wondering as it goes along about looking at the demolition costs for the YMCA, if we've got air show funding, and looking at perhaps that we need to extend weekly garbage collection through to October 31st, as I had a number of people asking me about that as well. So those are things that I'll bring up as we go along, but for right now, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Eby. Councillor Swanson.
Thank you. On page 10 of the budget document, the line for municipal taxation, the increase there, 0.6%, is that what we would consider assessment growth for the past year? Or do we have a number for what the assessment growth was?
Mr. Acker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, through you to Councillor Swanson. Yes, that would be the assessment.
So we had assessment growth of 0.6% then?
It would be slightly different than that. I don't have the figure because some is commercial, some is residential, and they're at different tax rates, but it's roughly in that neighborhood. Yes, it's 6 or 0.7%.
Okay. And the provincial revenue sharing grant, we're budgeting for an increase of 775,000?
Mr. Acker.
650.
650? So that would be equal to about 2.25% tax increase?
1% tax increase is $295,426, so just slightly over 2, I think.
So I just want to make the point that with the increased money from the province equaling about a 2.25% tax increase and the assessment growth equaling about 0.6 tax increase, if we were to do nothing in terms of raising costs of tax base, we'd already have the equivalent of a 2.85% tax increase to work with, which, given the agricultural sector this year and our which I think is rather challenged business environment, I'd be advocating that we live within that, which is better than zero. It's equal to a 2.85% tax increase if we were to do nothing in terms of raising taxes from the increased money from the province and the slight increase in assessment.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Swanson. Any other questions? Okay, well, I guess if I could pass the gavel, I just had a couple questions. Thank you. Okay, so I guess just a couple of questions. So we know that the 1% mill rate increase is 295,000. What's a percent increase in the water utility? Where, like, what's that represent in terms, like, financially? Through you.
Thank you. It would be worth just about $110,000.
Okay, and then similarly to that, through you, Mayor, told me what would be the 1% represent in the sanitary sewer in terms of an increase?
What, 80,000?
Okay. Okay, thank you. So it just, I know in last year's budget, and I guess first and foremost, I would say I do echo comments of administration that I really like the new format of the budget. I think it was a lot, I know just in terms of, you know, having a package to be able to go through and everything is kind of all in line and linked to each other. I thought that was really good. So I do appreciate administration's work on that. Referencing last year's budget, I remember having a document that had all of our capital expenditures, you know, our general capital, I'm assuming, I think the equipment reserve was in there, or no, yeah, the equipment, the utility capital expenditures was all in there. And it showed the 5-year plan as well as the carry forwards. Did we have that? I couldn't find that in this one, and now I just don't know if I just, you know, in the hundreds of pages, if it was missed, or if we didn't have that this time.
Thank you. So what we did with this particular budget is we broke general capital and utility capital. You will see a schedule for general capital that summarizes them all and one for utility. So you just have to put the two together. It would be the same equivalent of what you saw last year. Okay.
Okay, thanks. Well, yeah, and when I went through that, so I think it was mentioned that 72 million, I guess 72.6 million would be our utility capital expenditures. Was that correct?
Thank you, Chair. If I can go through, we did sort of stick to that $200 million target with an increase for the ISIP funding. So the target was about $213 million. If you add the two together, with carry forwards, they are about, I think it's just slightly over 213 million.
Okay, so the 5-year total expenditures with the carry forwards was about 213. Okay. Okay, yeah, that was kind of what I was trying to figure out there. Okay, now I guess just as a matter of process, and I had sent an email earlier today, or yeah, I think it was today, just asking about kind of some line items in the budget, mainly the operating budget, but some in the utility operating budget. Would now be the point of, like, I guess the part of the presentation where we could ask questions about that, or would that?
Absolutely.
Okay. So, and I did send the email, and I did get some requests for a couple of the different areas. So I do appreciate that. And I actually don't see anything in from the engineering. So maybe we could just do this verbally. It may have been sent, but it's not in my inbox. So, but I appreciate the responses. So one of the things I was doing when I was looking through the budget, and is just looking at, there's a couple things that kind of just stood out as odd to me when it came to what it's showing as 2019 projection, 2019 budget, and then the 2020 budget ask. And there was some areas where I didn't see there as very much in alignment, and there were some areas that did make sense because we have talked about increases to, or enhanced levels of service here, or increases that we talked about. So there was some that stood out that I didn't necessarily understand. So I thought I'd bring those forward.
Do you mind referencing those for other
Yeah, and I'll go through that in a second, just prefacing the comments. And then the other thing I had done is, and now that we're on our fourth budget, did have the opportunity to set out all the binders for the previous years and look basically line by line of what we've spent in the past as well. So for example, on page 35 in the budget book, on engineering services, we have a line item ceiling and capping. So I'm assuming that's around pavement and road maintenance. I just note that in 2019, the projection is to spend 15,000. The budget was 184, and then again we're asking for another 184,000 in 2020. So then I also looked back to the previous couple of years and found that in 2018 our projections were 0, and in 2017 they were 169. So I guess a question to you, Mayor Tomey, to administration, like on average in the last 3 years, we've spent about 150,000 on average, and taking into consideration the 1 year we didn't spend any. But we're asking for 184. So I'm just wondering if we could comment on is there an enhancement to that activity, or why the ask over and above what we normally spend?
Administration?
Yeah, I think that the councilor's observation is correct there. This is a program that's seen some variation year to year. Yeah, we didn't do a whole lot of it this year. So I think that initially it was kind of the dynamic between where we wanted that kind of preventative maintenance to lie in capital or in operating. So I think you've seen it oscillate between those two accounts to a greater or lesser extent. I'm not aware of a tender-ready package to go, but I am assured that we will be ready to do some preventative maintenance on pavement next year. So with respect to the funding level of that, I would suggest that we probably don't have a solid recommendation for you on it, and it could be left to the 3-year average.
Thank you. And this one, I won't worry about that one. It was minor. So there was another one in the engineering, same section, just a little bit further down. Parking meter repairs, and again, same kind of context. 2019, our projections were to spend 80,000. Our budget was 110. We're asking for 113. When I looked at the 3-year history, 2017 we spent 69. 2018 we spent 50. And now 2019, we're looking at 80, yet we're asking for 113. So again, average around 67K. We're asking for 113. Again, same question, are we looking at enhancing our process there? Just wondering what the increased ask is for the parking meter repairs.
I think I'll take a stab at this, and I'll let our manager of transportation step in and correct me if I step out of line. But certainly this would come down to parts from old meters and our ability to repair and replace with existing inventory or old parts, so to speak. I think the other pressure that we're going to see on that budget is some additional parking meters that do need to be installed over the next number of months in the new year.
Okay. I guess the same kind of question around the mains maintenance. I guess I didn't fully understand. That's I think that's on the where was that?
Page 36, next page.
It's on the next page. Yeah. Oh, right. Yeah, sorry, I didn't have it highlighted. So yeah, mains maintenance on page 36. I think is that most likely for the storm sewer main? Is that what okay. So again, just a similar question. Like there's the overall average was about 62,000. We're asking for 126. So again, are we looking at enhancing that program this year in 2020?
So yeah, this would be one where we're trying to get a little bit more proactive. If council recalls, we don't have a huge storm budget with respect to the maintenance and renewal. And some of that increase would be going towards, just doing maintenance, clearing out the lines, getting assessments done so we can inform a better picture of kind of what state and condition those lines are in.
Okay. Okay, well, I guess, I don't know. I did have several other questions kind of on the engineering side, and that was the kind of the one response I was waiting for. I don't know if I want to take up a whole bunch of time, like going through, I don't know, like there's several other kind of line items that I wanted to ask questions about. So I guess I'm just asking the council, like.
I'll ask the question then, is it something that it's good to highlight, and then that maybe administration, if they haven't already got back to you, they could get back to you?
Yeah, and I had sent all these in advance. And like I said, I hadn't got the responses back on these ones here.
Okay.
So I guess I would be willing to wait as long as we have an opportunity to further bring this up. Because again, what I'm looking for is if there is, a plan or something in the queue for 2020, I mean, I'm okay with that. But when I'm looking at 3-year averages and we're significantly spending less than what we're asking for, especially when we're asking for an increase over 2019, like unless there's like kind of a council directive or a plan to actually utilize that budget. Like I'm not interested in having all these increases take place. So that was kind of the context that I was looking at with some of these line items.
Okay.
Okay. Okay. Well, yeah, I'll just wait for, I guess, the response through writing. And then if, on my original request, and then if I have more questions on that, then I can bring those forward at the next session.
Okay.
Okay. Thanks.
You have the gavel.
Thanks. Take the gavel back. Okay. Next speaker, Councillor Swanson.
Thank you. Would this be appropriate time to ask for more information for things?
You're out of the queue. So.
It was meant. Your diploma's in engineering, I know.
It's green. I'm leaving it. I did hear it, but.
Of the proposed tax increase, 1% is to be dedicated towards Parks and Recreation capital to address an underfunding there. I'm wondering, could we get the 10-year history of capital expenditures in the Parks and Recreation Department, please? So when we consider that, we'd have a historical analysis, how much has been spent in that area. Thank you.
I believe our Director of Parks and Recreation already has that information.
Yeah, I can share it.
Yeah, so he will share it.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so I'm seeing no other speakers on this report. So again, we're looking for a tabling motion. Tabling motion pending finalization of the 2020 budgets. Okay, so the Councillor Looning moved that the communication be tabled pending finalization of the 2020 budgets. Seeing no other speakers, I'll call the question. All's in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Okay, the next item is a report CC 2019-0241 solid waste utility material crushing and recycling. Administration, would you like to speak to that?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That report just came out to you today, and so we don't believe it's been given council sufficient time to review. Our people are here, can present to you if you wish, but again, we're looking more to probably the next meeting to give council some time to read the report.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Puffault. Wishes of council, would you prefer to table this report pending review of the report and a time to do so? Okay. If I can get a motion, Councillor Eby.
I will make the motion to table this.
Okay. Table for consideration at December 4th special council meeting. All right, I'll call the question. All those in favor, opposed, and that's carried. Okay, the next item is report CC 2019-0228 regarding the urban forestry program. Mr. Pufalt.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Blais will present. We just want to, when we talk about maintenance, how important maintenance is, trees is another important asset of the city. And as Mr. Blais will go through, they're quite valued, quite high for the city. And if you look at climate change and some of the positive impacts that trees have upon the community, it's fairly huge. And so we want to, I think, talk about two things. One is making sure that we maintain trees properly and don't lose them. Because as you know, the old saying is the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is now. And the best time also now is to maintain our trees and keep what we have. And we work very hard to do that. And we want to enhance that program. So Mr. Blais, take it from there.
Thank you. Mr. Blais.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So with a few new faces in Parks and Rec, we took the summer months as an opportunity to just conduct a review of our parks operation in an attempt to address some of the gaps in service and look at ways that we can restructure and reprioritize based on our observations. 5 primary areas that we identified were forestry and pruning, pest control, inspections, trimming, and weekend staff coverage. Through some restructuring, we've developed a plan to allocate existing resources to all these areas with the exception of forestry, which is a primary reason for our request this evening. We have 2 requests for council to consider regarding the enhancement of our urban forestry program. The first request is to implement a year-round 2-person crew dedicated strictly to forestry so that we can improve upon our ability to respond to requests for service, attend to deadfall, stump removals, tree planting, tree inventorying, tree inspections. The request includes an additional seasonal staff person being added to the department from the beginning of May to the end of October. In November, one of the existing crew leads would replace the seasonal staff to maintain the 2-person crew for the winter months. The second request is to enhance our contracted block pruning program in order to improve our tree pruning cycle from 33 years to 14 years. I would like to note that the attachment to the report has some pretty valuable information regarding the importance and benefits of proper pruning cycles for our trees. In total, these requests would come at an annual cost of $60,035. Just also like to note that trees are an integral part of our community, especially because of our geographical location. They provide many social, environmental, and economic benefits to our community that we often don't consider. It's estimated that our urban forest consists of approximately 15,000 city-owned and maintained trees, which are currently being inventoried and tracked within our GIS systems. The value of these trees is in the $90 million range. Therefore, we must ensure we have a dedicated and sustainable tree maintenance plan in place. I'd also like to note that it is uncommon for a city our size and the amount of trees we have to not have a year-round crew dedicated to urban forestry. For example, City of Prince Albert has an inventory of 40,000 trees with a 4-person year-round crew, as well as a contracted block pruning program. City of North Battleford has 20,000 trees with a 3-person year-round crew. So that summarizes, I guess, the request. There's a lot of good information in the report as well, so we'd be happy to answer any questions or concerns you have regarding the request. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Blais. Mr. Pufalt.
And if I could, Mr. Chair, some of the positive benefits of trees beyond providing a habitat for birds are that a large tree provides enough oxygen for 4 people in a year. We have 15,000 trees, so we're providing just through the tree enough oxygen for 60,000 people. So again, the importance of our tree inventory is huge. You wouldn't be able to replace it, and I think we have estimates on that. So again, there's a lot of benefits to having a proper tree program, and some real practical ones of knocking off lights off our vehicles and not being able to get down back alleys properly. So I mean, there's some practical applications, some climate change applications, and again, maintenance is important regardless if it's a living species or a building.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Pufalt. Okay, Councillor Eby.
Thank you. I appreciate this report and this initiative. Almost every time I come across from South Hill, across the 9th Avenue Bridge, and I look towards the north of our city, and I see all these different trees, and some of them are huge, and there's a lot of 15,000 trees in the middle of the Bald Prairie, and I think that's pretty phenomenal that that we have that in our community. And I think we can probably all rest assured that, well, maybe not everyone, but most of those trees were planted by someone at some time. and they planted those to benefit us, right? Because as you said, the best to plant them was 20 or 30 or 50 years ago. So I do think it's really important that we take care of that asset, that $90 million asset. Some of my friends call me a tree hugger because I just hate when I see people chopping down big trees in their yards. And I know sometimes there's reasons for that, but we know the benefits of trees. I don't need to talk about that, but I think it's important to note that when we reduce spending, when we make a decision as council that we need to reduce spending and get departments to find places to save money, these are the programs that go by the wayside, and maybe they're low-hanging fruit, no pun intended. But even though they can be easily eliminated, and in the grand scheme of things, it's not that much money. I think it's really important that we have those programs in place. As good stewards of our community, we need to take care of all of our infrastructure, whether it's above the ground or in the ground or trees. So I am in support of this, and I look forward to us having more than 9% of our trees pruned in the next 5 years, because that's all that we've had in the last 5 years. So thank you for the report, and I am in support of it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Eby. Councillor McMahon.
Thank you. Just clarification in the report, it talks about under the section current block pruning, and it talked in there of in 2014, $40,000 was added to the Parks and Recreation budget for contracted tree pruning, and it's now up to $47,816. And this request is an additional $14,000, but nothing was done in 2018 and 19. So is that money just carried forward, or the chart below says nothing was done, sorry, in that regard. So where did that budget money go?
Yeah, my understanding is within our operating budget, if you don't use it, you lose it. So none of that money would be carried over. So in respect to what happened in those years, in 2018, I believe the department was directed to hold off on any spending just because of the provincial funding cuts that came through that year. And then this past year, we had some staffing. We had one of our arborists resigned in July. So we had to dedicate a lot of our regular funding that would go towards our crew, towards contracting out that work now. So all our requests for service, all our storm damage removals, all those kinds of things. So 2019, we haven't been able to complete any contracted block pruning.
So the current budget as it's presented to us has what's been done or what's been budgeted in the past, and this request is additional over and above that. Then the 60,000 is more staffing, correct?
Yes, the 60,000 would be able to return to a contracted block pruning and have our staff focus on our other forestry matters.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Councillor McMahon. Councillor Swanson.
Thank you. So this would be a request for additional funds to what is in the budget now? Of how much, sorry?
Thank you, Councillor Swanson. I believe it's $60,035.
A long time ago, the city of Moose Jaw actually had a municipal tree commission of which I was a member. And the policies that are being advocated here were put forward and actually were significantly adopted. And we used to have a actual dedicated program towards the tree maintenance, establishing inventories and things like that. And I've watched over time how in Parks and Recreation, the importance of parks has diminished. This predates the existing personnel, by the way. Okay. The importance of parks has diminished in terms of recreation. And there was never a motion to reduce maintenance of our tree inventory or pruning. But obviously, that's just one of the things that kept getting sliced and diced. And you're right, we have to take care of them. But I would point out that we used to have these programs in place, and it weren't that they were eliminated by anyone. And if you can go back and check the history on that if you like. But thank you.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Swanson. Councillor Froese.
Thank you, Chair. Through you to administration. Well, I mean, trees are part of the reason I think a lot of people choose where they want to live in our city as well. So they're very important aesthetically and otherwise. I was just wondering though, in this report, is there what is the plan around replanting some of the trees and addressing Dutch elm disease, as well as are we planting additional trees outside of the ones that currently exist? I know there's ones in Crescent Park and other areas of our city that are just are deadwood.
Yeah, so our procedure is that any tree that's removed, we replace it. In 2018, we planted almost 250 new trees. In 2017, the number was 300, almost 200 in 2016. Even if you look at our net increases, so when you factor when the ones that were removed plus additional trees in 2017, we did, I'll guess again, almost 250 trees. So we are definitely increasing the size of our urban forest. But I think it's important even to have that policy in place whenever there's a public tree that goes out, a new one goes in.
And as we know, the federal government has lots of initiatives around climate change. Do you think there'll be any potential for us to take part in any grants that might be around the additional planting of trees?
Blake?
Yeah. Hold it. Hey, thank you. Yeah, no, we're constantly looking out for different grants. I know we participate in the TD Tree Days every year. So that's a grant that we do get. This year we were able to do a section off 9th Avenue Northeast through that grant program. But we are keeping our eye open for sure.
Great. Okay, thank you, Chair. That's all the questions I had.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Rose. Councillor Eby?
Well, thank you. I'm going to move the motion as recommended that the City of Moose Jaw establish a dedicated crew to maintain the city's urban forest, with the source of funding being the 2020 operating budget in the amount of $45,850, and that the City of Moose Jaw expand the contracted block pruning program with the source of funding being the 2020 operating budget in the amount of $14,185. And I'll just make one comment. I said it before, but I just think it's important to remember that when we get to the end of budget and we decide it's too high and we say to administration, just go back and find some savings and, cut your budgets by 5%. And we don't make the decisions ourselves. We just ask administration to find savings. These are the programs that get cut. So when we want administration to reduce the budget, we need to direct where we want the reductions to be, in my estimation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Eby. Seeing no other speakers. Oh, Councillor McMahon.
Sorry, just for my clarification, because I see there's a couple mentions of this, different than prior years. If we vote on this now, this is the last time we're looking at this item. Is that right? It's added in and
Administration?
Yes.
so in previous years, we've sort of made all motions go to budget and then we deal with them all at the end. So we have some idea at the end of the process what our assessment changes are. And I guess I'm a little bit unclear as to why that's changed this year.
Okay, administration.
Thank you, Chair. So that was part of the process we brought forward, was that we would deal with the budget in council. We sort of modeled ourselves after the city of Regina. So when you deal with it in council, the decisions you make are final at council. Previously in the past, we did it in budget committee. So that could come forward to budget committee and you could pull it out and vote on it again. So that was the rationale for that, is you make those decisions once. One thing I would suggest, though, if you are concerned about making a decision at this point and where will we end up at the end, you can simply table this, right? You can table this to that point later in the budget where you're at closer to finalization, and you can lift it from the table at that point and approve it. So, thank you.
Well, certainly, I guess that's why I asked the question at our council meeting the other night, or at the inquiry, based on the agenda that was presented to us, because somehow to me, we sort of glossed through the big book already, and now we're into the things that we're adding on, and we don't really have an idea where this is going to end up. And so my preference would be that we do table this, but so I would like to make a motion that we table this until, what's the proper terminology, just till the finalization of the budget?
Councilor McMahon, would you be able to hold that tabling motion? I did have one more speaker in the queue.
Okay, sorry, sure I will.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Swanson.
Thank you. Speaking more to the concern Councillor McMahon raised, I want to be very clear. I'm totally in favor of adopting a budget prior to the beginning of the new year, which was the sentiment of council. But I opposed the recommendation that was brought forward with all the budget policy because I was a little skeptical. Why did we have this page long of stuff about how to do the budget? And it's like an omnibus bill that they bring into Parliament. It's 200 pages long and there's 16 things in there you don't really notice. But it is absolutely absurd that we would be in a position where we would vote on this without knowing how it impacts the final budget. And to move from having a budget committee that reports to a regular meeting of council, as opposed to doing these special meetings of council, I think it slipped by us. And that's why I gave notice of motion at the last meeting that the adoption of the capital and operating budgets be done at a regular meeting of city council, not on one held on an off night where it's not televised regularly as in Shaw. And I know it's live streamed. I'm going to hear that argument, but there's a significant difference in the process, all about getting it done before year end. And there was a whole bunch of things kind of got shelved in with that. And this is where the problem arises. We're asked to vote on a $60,000 item, which becomes done for sure. And then we're going to go on and look at a bunch of other stuff when we should have that opportunity to look at it entirety in the end. And by simply tabling everything to then, I think that's the wrong way to do it. We should be in budget committee, which is the way the process has been for years and years. That doesn't cause any delays. It allows that one final look at things, which has been taken away by this new process.
Okay, thanks, Councilor Swanson. Mayor Tomey.
Yeah, thank you. So before this gets tabled, then I would ask, what is the percentage increase that this would represent on our budget? I just want it publicly.
Administration.
I know what it is, but.
Finance people are feverishly.
0.22.
Okay.
Anything further, Mayor Tomey?
No, that's fine. That's just so we've got a running total, and we'll probably do this on every item that's brought forward so that we would know what the final outcome would be. I've got an estimated 2.67 if we were to approve all of the, or 2.69 that would approve all of the present. Go ahead.
Yes, so if I may comment, our city comptroller has the running total, so she can certainly put those amounts into the budget. Just the gross amount is all you have to put in. If you put in 65,035, I think actually it comes to, okay, I was wrong. It's only 0.2. So we're at 2.22, but she can certainly do that for you on any of those. So just have to suggest that and we'll put them.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Acker. Anything else, Mayor Tomey?
No, that's fine.
Okay, Councilor Looning.
Thank you, Councillor Warren. I mean, kind of having an argument about where we are now, I don't know if it's a moot point or not, or a debate about that, but it is a valid point with these special council meetings, because what's missing from this, unless I've missed it, and please somebody correct me if I'm wrong, is my understanding is from all the reading that I've done is this is a status quo budget. We had asked last year that nothing new be added to this and that new items be brought at the end, but there's no list of what those new items are. So I agree with Councillor Swanson and Councillor McMahon that to, approve these motions now without knowing what, if we put all of those new items into the budget, what that means, doesn't make any sense to me. And I've asked for something like that over the years and we don't have that again. Now, do we have a list of all the new asks before tonight? Because it's not in here. This is all I had before tonight.
Mr. Prufalt.
Yeah, the agenda that came out, I believe 2 days ago listed all the new asks, and that's on Wednesday, November 27th. The agenda, there are items from B to
Right,
H.
but nowhere, Mr. Poofall, do we have a summary page that says the forestry is this. If this all gets approved, this is what your new tax increase is. Or have I missed like a spreadsheet like that?
No, I think that's impossible for us to do. We don't know council's wishes on that. So
No,
that's,
no, I
that's
know,
why it's
but
added this way.
I know, but you're asking for something on each of these items.
Yeah.
New to this budget. So in my opinion, there could have been one line on a spreadsheet that said urban forestry program, $60,035. And then the next item is economic development initiatives, whatever that amount is. And on the bottom, in a situation where council approves all of those, this is what your tax increase would be. I don't have that. So I think so just getting back to the argument or debate about us being here in special council meetings, that did elude us. Because nowhere did we approve that we were going to be in council meetings to do this. I think, no, we talked about, because I thought we were just going to be in budget and then come to council and approve these motions. I didn't really, I mean, Mayor Tomey made a motion 2 years ago that executive and budget committees are televised now. So, I mean, what difference does it make if, so, I mean, I think there's some validity in the fact that we should be tabling all of these motions to the end to see where we're at. So I would vote in favor of the tabling motion when it comes. But I would like to know, like, unless I'm missing, like, I mean, something in this, in the e-scribe that would have shown me what each of these new initiatives are, and then at the bottom, what that tax increase would be if everything was approved. Because, and I can do the math and figure out, okay, if I don't approve that or I don't approve that, then maybe the tax increase is 3.42 or whatever, right? But I mean, that is something I've asked for over the last however many years, and it's still not here. So I'm just wondering if that's something maybe we could get before the next meeting. I don't know what's going to happen next, but I mean, maybe that's something we can get as a supplement to these reports.
I think that whatever council wishes, we will try and get for you. Again, the whole budget process was trying to expedite and get done quicker. And of course, allowing council sufficient time to deal with this. So, I mean, there's only two issues really in the enhanced programs that add to the budget, and we just covered it right now. I think what's hard for us to do is anticipate council's wishes on every one. And so perhaps the best solution forward would be approve of something in principle, and then that way we can put those together as we go to the next budget meeting. Because right now we don't know what council will approve or not. And so if it's an agreement, approval in principle, then we can start adding and bring back to the next meeting. If you approve 3 of those, then we can bring back what the actual impact would be upon the tax, on property taxes.
Do it in real time.
And we can do it real time as well.
Okay, so I don't know if I'm actually getting my point across, but I'll just say one more thing and then I won't. But so this is the budget from last year, no new asks in it, other than that Parks and Rec 1%.
Right.
Right? Which, to be honest, then it isn't a status quo budget. You got 1% in here, right?
Yeah. The
Anyways,
status quo is 1.02. We very clearly
Right.
said another 1%
Right.
was the Parks and Rec.
okay.
It was
So
not,
this is what we asked for last year, was a status quo and then have the new initiatives on the outside, right? So all I'm saying is that why couldn't we have a cover page to this that has the amounts for each of the new asks, that then at the bottom says, okay, this one is going to be a 0.22% tax increase, which Mr. Acker just indicated for the forestry program, 0.22% increase, right? So each one of them would be a particular increase, right? I'm just saying you can add that up to give us an indication that if this council majority approved all of those things, we would know where we're at, right? What Councillor Swanson and Councillor McMahon has said, and I agree with that, is that we don't know where we're at if we approve all these new asks, because we don't know that information, right?
Yes, I can do that for you.
Thank you, Mr. Acker. That's all I'm asking. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank
thanks,
you,
Councilor.
Councillor Warren.
Okay, Councilor Eby.
Thank you. Well, just to the budget policy new way we're doing things, it's completely different than anything that I had done before. However, I do know for sure that when budget policy came, that I know that I asked the question because I was unclear. So I did ask the question when we were all here and administration was all here. So does this mean that we are dealing with budget in council, not in budget committee? And I was told that, yes, I was correct. So the question was asked and the answer was given. So I'm not saying that I think it's better or worse or whatever. I'm just saying that if it slipped by, the question was asked. Administration did not slip it past on us because it was asked. Anyways, I'm fine if you want to table it or whatever. I'm fine with that, but I'll support it. Whatever. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Eby. Councillor Looney?
Thank you, Councillor Warren. So just a comment to Councillor Eby, fair enough. If that happened and I missed that, absolutely. But I think the summary page that Mr. Acker said he's going to provide to us will help us. And if we can get that for the next meeting, then we'll know, right? Then I think approving these motions while we're in budget could work fine, because then I know which ones I want to approve or not approve, or maybe I want to approve all of them or not approve, right? I'll kind of know where we're at. So I think that's all that's missing, really. It will work here for sure. We just need one more piece of the puzzle, I think. So thank you for that, Councillor Eby, and thank you, Councillor Warren, for the
Okay,
last
thanks,
two.
Councillor Looney. All right, so I'm seeing no other speakers. Councillor McMahon, did you want to get in on that?
Do I have to repeat what I said? Well, I'd like to table this until for budget finalization.
You want to say to the December 4th meeting? Is that in order to say it like
You
that?
can just table it and then we'll lift it from the table
Okay.
at the appropriate time. You don't have to include finalization. So if it's appropriate the next meeting or the one after that, we'll lift it when it's appropriate.
Okay, tabling motion on the floor. No discussion. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. 7:45. All right, so I think we've been at the desk here for just over 2 hours. So I think we're going to take a 5-minute break if council is in agreement with that. Stretch the legs and be back in 5 minutes. Be back at 7:46. You know what I was thinking? I gotta reread that. Yeah. Well, I mean, you heard him say it, right? Or how many people are watching live? How many? That's one good thing about the.
14 people are watching this live stream. Should we wave? We could wave.
That was the strategy for this.
I don't think so.
I do think so.
I think that was, I don't know. I agree with you about that.
For that Parks and Rec, you want just like totally cheer?
Why do we do the totally cheer?
What? Shoot.
Multiplex is in there. Parks and Rec capital. Well, that's, like if you're gonna tell me I don't spend enough money fixing up the sports facilities, I'm not sure. We've actually, that is the one area of the city budget that has not been. And it should include all the capital in Parks and Rec, I won't make you go back to when we did the cultural center. And there's another 9 million. There was 9 million. 2003. You check. I planted more trees in here than all these people.
Did you put any comments in
We
there?
had budgets for tree pruning, we had budgets for maintenance.
I thought that'd be cool.
They were all there. So every year, the rec guy.
Points in there as we speak.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. Well, it was before her too.
that'd be cool.
Yeah. I watched those things.
Oh yeah, I can do this. Crystal's up there, but Crystal can't hear what. Where's my paper? Okay, I'd like to call this meeting back into order. The next item on the agenda is report number CC 2019-0242 regarding economic development initiatives. Administration.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. 3 initiatives from economic development. Again, one is associated with our land sales and support through the agreement that was signed with the city and Carpierre. The second one is, of course, we talk a lot and we spend a time attracting and prospecting for new customers or new business to the city. And this program being suggested is one that we work with our internal businesses, our existing businesses, and see if there's some way that we can help them to expand, grow. And then the third one is funding for the Rural and Northern Immigration Pilot Program. As we know, we are short a number of positions, a number of jobs, vacancies in the city. And this is an opportunity to work. And as you know, we were one of the 10 or 11 communities in the country that was approved for this program. So Mr. Dixon and Ms. Sanson are here to provide further information. And if I could, just one point made earlier today, the term modest tax increase was not from us. That was from the local media when I did an interview. That's what they said to me. So we didn't bring up modest increase. So I just want to clarify that. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Prufhold. Mr. Dixon.
Thank you, Chair. Through you to council, I'll do my best. I've got a bit of a frog in my throat today, the last couple of days. But yes, as the city manager indicated, we've got 3 initiatives, 3 initiatives that I think would give great value to the city and our economic development activities and what we're trying to do to attract industry and business to our community. So the business retention expansion triage project really addresses the real critical piece of ensuring your existing businesses are growing, because typically that's where you get 70% of your growth in new jobs and growth in your assessment. So that's very critical. We are taking an approach on that that we would focus on food production, ag value add, because it's a strength of ours and it's what we're visioning for the industrial park. As well, the RNIP, Rural and Northern Immigration Pilot Program, is a great program. We've been meeting regularly to get it going. The issue with it is that there was no funding provided by the federal government when they announced it. So while it's a great program, we are doing all we can to try and seek funding for that. And really the third initiative is around, it's about our investment attraction and not waiting necessarily for people to come to us, but actually going out and looking for companies to invest in our city. we would do that partnering. Use the example of Carpier. We know they will be promoting the park in wherever they're going. If we can participate somehow in helping support that, we did indicate we would do what we could to support those initiatives. So I think that's those are critical pieces. And again, we need to be aggressive in that area. So unless somebody has questions, the business retention expansion triage project is carried out by a very reputable economic development company, agency, consulting agency throughout Canada. And it comes in at a cost of $15,000, which would allow us to focus on one particular sector. And we're saying value-add agriculture, food production would be that sector. And that's a cost of $15,000. The RNIP, and there was lots of support information, so you may or may not have questions. Moose Jaw, we're talking about rolling that out sometime in April. Some of the other 11 communities that were selected have already rolled it out. We are taking a position that, first of all, trying to secure resources to be able to carry it out, but also see what the other communities are doing in terms of best practices. And they're more than happy to share that kind of information with us so that when we roll our program out here in Moose Jaw, many of the communities will have worked through some of the bugs. We'll have been able to see that, and we'll capitalize on that and have a good program here. And I guess really just the other one would be the attraction initiatives and missions. And just to reiterate, we've done some good things with updating our website, which will be released here, rolled out in the new year. That's a critical piece for site selectors and people looking at your community, whether to live or invest. But equally important is going out and trying to secure investment, not just sitting back waiting for it to happen. So I think the motions are fairly clear, and the total cumulative $30,000 in initiative requests from Economic Development Services.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Dixon.
Which is 0.06.
Yeah, just one minute.
I think a portion of that was to come from reserve.
Yeah, so $20,000 is 0.06 for a municipal tax increase. The other $10,000 land development fund.
Great. Okay, thank you, Mr. Acker. Mr. Pufol. Any questions of Mr. Dixon? Councillor Froese?
Thank you. So I'm not really familiar with the business retention expansion plan. Can you sort of give me a couple of examples of how that plan would be initiated?
So business retention expansion initiatives are probably one of the top initiatives economic developers do throughout. It takes resources though. So really what it is, a big part of it is you go out and you meet face to face with the business and you do an interview process and you ask specific questions about, what are their barriers to growth? Are they planning to expand? Are they going to be hiring new people? What are some of the opportunities that may be out there that if others knew about it or if we knew about it, we could help make happen. So really it's that engagement, one-on-one engagement. And his worship and myself, we go out regularly and meet with our business community. But this is a formal program that has an interview process, and then they accumulate the data and present opportunities that need to be addressed and gone out after.
And my second question I have is around the Rural Northern Immigration Pilot Project. I think the initiative is really great, but it's really, really frustrating that we have a program from the federal government and there's absolutely $0. So it goes back to the communities and that want to benefit from this to actually try to find the funding for it. And in your report here, it says it's actually 75,000. Well,
Well,
that's
we
a-
project, there's a great deal of administration required to manage the program, and it could be up to 3 years. And so for an administrator, a office space, things like that, there's going to be some costs. So we just ballparked it at that. But yeah, they are providing some resources in terms of they'll come out, they'll help you set the program up, they'll train you, and they'll do some of that. But financial resources, not.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Councillor Rose. Councillor Swanson?
Well, thank you. Page 3 of your report at the top, it states, according to the Conference Board of Canada Mid-Sized Cities Outlook 2019, the city of Moose Jaw's economy generated a total of 1,600 jobs over the past 3 years, but it is expected to shed 500 jobs this year before recovering with the addition of 200 net new jobs in 2020. I'm wondering if you could forward that article or whatever to us as members of council, please. Thank you.
The city participated this year in Conference Board of Canada, reached out to communities, mid-sized communities like ours. They do this for the bigger communities, and we participated in it this year. So we actually have a formal report that I will send to all council members.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Swanson. Councillor Rose?
Thanks. Sorry, I just had one other question about the Rural Northern Immigration Pilot Project. If we're going to contribute this amount of money, is there anyone else in the community that's partnering with us fund-wise, and how much would that be coming from them?
We don't know yet. We're actively reaching out. We are looking at funding Western diversification, often fund these kind of programs. We understand that there's been some funding secured in other communities that have been successful in the program. So, yeah, we're exploring all options. Absolutely. The one option that isn't available is direct contributions from businesses and industry, because they would view that as maybe a conflict in the sense that they would expect certain privileges and certain, sending people their way, I guess, plainly put.
And what happens to the actual program? Because we're one of the 11 communities. If we're unable or don't approve the funding for this administrative side, what
Yeah,
happens to that?
we would be able to withdraw from the program, the pilot. Yeah.
Okay, good. Thank you, Chair. That's all the questions I have.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Rose. Councillor McMahon?
Thank you. I'm not sure if this is through to you, Mr. Dixon, or through to finance. I was a little surprised to read that we're thinking of taking the $10,000 visitation costs out of the land reserve, and I'm just, have we done that in the past? And do we have some parameters set up as to what are sort of allowable expenses out of a reserve type account like that, or?
Administration?
Thank you, Chair, through you to Councillor McMahon. That will be part of what will come forward to that review of reserves, as we intend to put that in bylaw format. So no, we don't have any formal sort of guidelines at this point. For this particular $10,000, I believed it was expected to be part of the proceeds from our Southeastern Industrial Subdivision land sale. So it would be part of those funds which we would receive. But we don't have specific overreaching guidelines at this point. We would hope to have that in our policy. Thank you.
So the land sales that says will be enhanced, is this something other than, I assume that was something other than the Southeast, perhaps in Grayson Industrial, or like we're selling that all in one group, right?
Right. And what as you recall from the agreement, we promised to help support the sale of lands in industrial park and work with Carpierre. And so that's why we're proposing it comes out of the reserve, because if the land sale doesn't go through, then these trips would not be required.
Okay. So any idea frequency, or like, will there be a number of these that are likely going to be in the future, or is that too early to say at this point?
This one is proposed for 2 people to go to China.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, thanks, Councillor McMahon. Mayor Tomey.
Yeah, thank you very much. Just want to go over a couple of points here. With regards to the the Rural and Northern Immigration Pilot Program, I know that was an opportunity that we fought to get for this community because, as you've said earlier on, that you and I do go out into the community, and one of the issues that local businesses are struggling with is getting employees. And that's a challenge. And so that is one of the barriers for businesses to be able to expand because they can't get people to work. And so if they can't get them to work and attract them in, they're having that obstacle. And further, the third point with regards to the support for trade missions, I know that this was discussed in our strategic planning session with Mr. Griffiths about, and you can correct me, Mr. Dixon, but in Prince Edward Island, was it Charlotte or maybe it was Mr. Hemingway we asked this point that they send, their economic development officer to Europe like twice a year, and it's not a holiday, it's to attract business and to be able to have a presence. And, one of our big trading partners is Southeast Asia. And, we can think we know what they want, but until we're over there and actually, pressing flesh, so to speak, we need to be able to know what they're willing to, what they want. And so I think that is a very good opportunity for the Economic Development Office and for our economic development team as a whole. And I've had conversations with others in the community and with the province with regards to, what is our presence overseas. And right now, all we rely on is the province, and we rely on the federal government. And sometimes you need that local flavor to be able to deal with that. So thank you very much for your report.
Okay, thanks, Mayor Tomey. Seeing no other speakers in the queue, I guess if I could pass the gavel and ask questions. Okay, thanks, Mayor Tomey. Just a question to you, Mayor Tomey. Just on the I guess the travel budgets in general. And I think this had been discussed in the past about the possibilities of having, expenditures rolled up in some of these cases. But I guess the question is just overall in general, like with our 2019 expenditures in the travel budgets combined versus the 2019 budgets and then subsequent 2020 asks, do we have kind of like, I guess, is it possible to utilize existing travel budgets to fund a couple of these missions?
Administration?
Certainly the budget amounts are there, but these trips wouldn't happen unless the deal with Cartier, when the deal with Cartier completes. So that's why it's more of a contingency basis. Because again, in the agreement, we agreed to support Cartier in their efforts to bring industrial to the park. So at this point in time, we haven't been invited to another trade mission. And that may change for sure, and we may come back and talk to council more about it. But at this point in time, it's to support the agreement that we've signed with Cartier.
No, I get that. I mean, but it doesn't necessarily mean we have to identify a new source of funding to fund the travel. So I guess it's a travel. I guess at the bare bones, it's travel, right? So I guess do we have a roll up of our operating costs in terms of actuals versus budget and our travel budgets for 19 and 2020 asks?
Thank you, Chair. Short answer is no. And one of the reasons for that is our chart of accounts does not identify travel as a separate object account in all business units. So it takes some work to retrieve that. I believe we did that last year for you. So we certainly could do that if you want. I'm not sure if we can get that for the next meeting. We would try, but it is a bit of work to extract. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. That's all I had. I'll take the gavel back.
You have the gavel.
Councillor Swanson.
Thank you. The economic development budget is a part of planning and development. I'm just wondering, it doesn't break it down separately. I'm just wondering, what is the existing budget for economic development?
Administration.
Thank you. Economic development is listed under special projects under planning and development. So the budget for next year is $55,349.
And then the salary component?
Salary component is listed in salaries at the top. In the 470 as part of the department.
Well, I'd be suggesting that we do these within the existing budgets.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Swanson. Okay, is there any other questions of Mr. Dixon? Seeing none, so thank you very much for your presentation, Mr. Dixon.
Pardon me, excuse me.
All right, wishes of council. Mayor Tomey?
Well, for process wise, to follow what we just previously done, what I'll do is I will make the motion, and if someone wants to table that motion, because I know that, did you have a request, Councillor Warren, don't you, for travel rollovers?
I did, we did talk about it. I don't think there was any direction to get that though. But I would like an opportunity to look it up.
Okay, so then I'll move the motion that the City of Moose Jaw contract with MDB Insight to carry out the business retention and expansion BRE plus E triage project with a focus on value-added agriculture and food production, with a source of funding being the 2020 operating budget in the amount of $15,000. That the City of Moose Jaw financially support the Rural and Northern Immigration Pilot RNIP program, with the source of funding being the 2020 operating budget in the amount of $5,000. And further, that the City Council support the inclusion of funding to facilitate participation in trade missions, with the source of funding being from the land reserve in the amount of $10,000.
Okay, thank you, Mayor Tomey. Councillor Looning?
Thank you, Councillor Warren. So I think I've heard this here tonight. So when I read this motion, I thought these were for new initiatives, but this $10,000 is not for new initiatives. It's for existing, because we've referred to Carpair in what the $10,000 is for, right? And my question is, who would be participating in those missions?
Administration?
Well, certainly in dealing with the culture there, they expect the mayor to be there, so it would be the mayor and then one staff person.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Looning. Mayor Tomey?
Yeah, but so just for clarification, there's a bylaw that is required for council approval, that if the mayor is to travel overseas, outside of North America, that I would need council approval. So there's a bylaw concerning that, so that should be noted. I'm not sure if that's well known, so.
Okay, thank you, Mayor Tomey. You back in. Councillor Looning? All right. Okay, tabling motion, so no further discussion. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? It's carried. Okay, so the next item is a report number 2 CC 2019-0243 regarding the Parks and Recreation Department capital budget shortfall. Mr. Pufall.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Certainly some discussion about this topic already, and we just want to, again, state that, throughout the budget, we talk about the need to maintain trees, maintain buildings, and ensure that we are actually making some progress forward. And so Mr. Blais and Parks and Recreation Department has done an extensive job in evaluating our assets and what work needs to be done. There's actually some long outstanding issues that have, I think, been in budget certainly prior to my time. And I'm not sure exactly how long they've been there. And I think we found a solution to that, which is very important. And we're also, again, might see a little bit of a theme of energy and green, but there's a lighting project here to again start reducing our footprint. And really, this is an opportunity again to create a capital fund for Parks and Recreation, because as we know, we're underfunding and we need to find a way to increase funding to it. This seems to be the year that would be possible to do so. And I think from administration point of view, very much support this to council. And so we want to, again, that's why it was in the cover letter that way, is that it's absolutely critical that we carry forward in this type of process and ensure that we're looking after everything as much as we possibly can. With that, I'll pass it on to Mr. Blais.
Thank you, Mr. Blais.
Thank you. As previously discussed tonight, our capital program funding is something we've kind of highlighted, and a few reasons for this. When you look at the overall value of our facilities, we're in the $155 million range. That doesn't include Mosaic Place, which is currently third-party managed and responsible for their own capital program. But what the Parks and Rec program includes is we have 9 indoor facilities, 75 outdoor facilities, 29 playgrounds, 2 cemeteries, and over 40 kilometers worth of trails. As we've seen in the charts tonight, the capital funding has stayed fairly consistent over the past 10 years. Our 2020 funding is 2% less than our 10-year average, while our facilities are 10 years older. Current capital plan also doesn't provide any funding towards any new infrastructure projects in order to meet the demands of the community, such as outdoor pickleball courts, new spray parks, more outdoor basketball courts, mostly focused on mechanical upgrades, things like that, and less on items that would put smiles on kids' faces. So investments are made into facility renewal throughout their life cycles. Life cycles will increase, emergency repairs will decrease. The city will avoid having to allocate large amounts of capital funding to completely renew a facility at one time. Recent publications have shown sustainable renewal programs should see an annual allocation of at least 1.5% of the replacement value of a facility, and our current program is less than 1%. Just to get us to the 1.5% mark would be an additional $2.3 million in annual funding, which I think we all understand the current scenario, something that's not feasible in 1 year, but something that we could work towards. I guess the good news in all this is we're not alone. I just reviewed the 2019 infrastructure report card that came out across Canada, and a lot of municipalities have these same challenges. So it's going to be a challenge for us just to find a solution to address this while being sustainable. In order to paint a better picture, we did attach a summary of the current capital plan with a list of priorities, and then also a separate list of priorities that remain unfunded, as well as the list of the 4 projects that are being recommended as part of the proposed 1% increase. Those projects include dressing room upgrades at the Playmore Palace to better serve all users of the facility at a cost of $109,000. Council may remember this was previously in the funded budget, but that's I believe the previous budget was $400,000. That was mostly due to the plan was to build a separate room outside of the existing structure. We found some opportunities to build 2 dressing rooms, 1 in each arena within the existing structure at a significant cost savings there. The next project is LED lighting conversion at the Moose Jaw Cultural Center just to increase energy efficiency. That one's $80,000. The third one is some irrigation upgrades in the Iron Bridge development just to help improve the quality of the park space. We're having a lot of issues with getting proper turf to establish within a lot of the areas, especially the houses that back onto the park space. So I think irrigation would help us get that established. And the fourth one is the development of a Parks and Recreation Master Plan. In order to help us provide a clear vision for delivery of parks and recreation services in the city. I think this is one of the first presentations I made at strategic planning to the city council, was just the importance of having a plan. The last time our department adopted a plan was 1976. It's a little bit outdated. Typically a master plan would run you in about the 10-year range. So it should be looked at every 10 years. So I think it would be a good opportunity for us to engage the community, to determine priorities, what the community would like to see when it comes to parks and recreation services, and also when it comes to budget, we would help us prioritize based on what the community wants. So those are the 4 projects we're recommending with the 1% increase. As I mentioned, detailed descriptions of each project are in the report. And moving forward, I think we want to work towards establishing a better asset management system, which would include risk assessment ratings for all projects based on risks such as mechanical failure, service disruptions, health and safety. And our new ERP system will be great benefit to implementing a new asset management strategy, which again will allow us to better prioritize our capital projects and budget requests. So thank you for the opportunity, and I'd be happy to answer any questions related to the report or any of the recommended projects.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Blais. Mayor Tomey.
Yeah, thank you. So thank you very much for the presentation, Mr. Blais, and for the report. I'd like to, just for clarification, in previous conversations, one of the comments that was brought forward to me was the arena change rooms for the girls. And is that what you're addressing as an upgrade? Because it's abysmal. Just, you know, the state of that room for young girls, you know, whether they're playing hockey or figure skating. I just want clarification. That's what you're addressing in this year's budget?
Yes, thank you. Yes, the dressing room upgrades that we have identified. So currently there are 4 dressing rooms within each arena. When there are players of multiple genders on a team, one has to go to another change room. We do have one at the Birch Hunt, which is just underneath the staircase, which isn't ideal. So yes, this would accommodate that.
Okay, thank you. So thank you very much for that. I do appreciate that. And then I know very early on, the city manager and I and you were joined, we were joined by you and Mr. Mickelborough, and we went around the community. We were looking at different areas within the community, and one of the areas that we looked at was the Sunningdale area. And we talked about community pride and cleanup, and the issues with the dams being built by beavers there. Is that being addressed in this budget? And is that something that we're looking to implement in the new year for a community pride cleanup? Because I know that was discussed with some neighbors in that area.
Mr. Blais.
Yeah, thank you. A lot of the issues we addressed in Sunningdale, yeah, part of it, we did have a community cleanup scheduled for this fall, and unfortunately the weather didn't work out for us. So we will be looking at that again in the spring. We actually had, I think it was up to 150 people sign up to help us out there. So it would have been a great event, but we're going to look to do that in the spring. A lot of the items there, it just needs a one-time work bee, get things back to an acceptable level, and then establishing a maintenance program moving forward, which I think we can do within our existing operating budget. And then, I guess, moving forward, looking at opportunities on the capital side to see if there's anything that will need some type of renewal. But the first step is just to get in there, do the initial cleanup, establish a plan to maintain it moving forward.
Okay, thank you for addressing those. Appreciate that.
Okay, thank you, Mayor Tomey. Councillor Looney.
Thank you, Councillor Warren. Question through you to Mr. Blais, just for my own clarification. So this 1%, it's 1.018 actually. Is this the 1% that's in the binder, or is this in addition to?
Mr. Blais. Or I guess Mr. Hacker.
We all want to say in the binder. In the binder.
It's included.
It's included.
So
in
that
the
is, so the 1% that's in the binder, this is not an additional ask.
No.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Looney. Councillor McMahon.
Thank you. Just a couple quick questions. And you mentioned a number of the parks, or they're listed here. Do we ever get to a point where, do we have any idea, how active some of these parks are? A lot of them were built, some of the small parks were built years ago when neighborhoods were significantly different than they are now. And I just wonder if that's something that we ever take a look at, and is there ever a time when you sunset a park? And the second question I have, I guess, just around the lighting program or proposal at the cultural center. Is that for the whole building, or is that for the theater part of it, or both? Or because the activity in the theater isn't that substantial, I guess. So I'm just wondering, is there that much of a payback? The lights aren't on there daily like they might be in the office side of it, right?
Administration?
Okay, thank you. In regards to monitoring the park activity, you'll see in our business plan for next year is a plan to do an audit on all our playgrounds. And within that audit, we work with our GIS team on doing what's the population around our playgrounds and establish a plan. Do we need to be renewing these playgrounds based on how many kids are living in the area, different things like that. Another important piece of looking at that information would be our master plan, going out to the community and finding out the exact usage of all these through our master plan consultation, through our surveys. So I guess that would give us the information we need to decide if we're going to be investing in renewal or new infrastructure in these locations in the future. And when it comes to the lighting at the cultural center, we would definitely start with the office space first. And if there's additional funding available with our $80,000 allocation, we have to complete the theater as well.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks, Councilor McMahon.
If I might, Mr. Chair, we touched upon the asset management program, and Mr. Blade talked about how it's going to be included in the new program that council has approved. What was the cost that we had originally looked at for that asset management program?
Well, I think the original startup would about, Corey might know, $40,000 a year.
Yeah, so that's a cost we've been able to not have to spend because of the approval on Monday night.
Okay, Councilor Swanson.
Thank you. Through you to administration. This represents a drop in the bucket of the needs. I think, do you have an estimate of what it would be a realistic number for us to have a handle on the requirements on an annual basis?
Mr. Blake.
Thank you, Councilor Swanson. The list that we've developed right now of our total unfunded projects is near 8.8 million over the next 5 years.
In addition to what?
In addition to the 5.9 that's currently in the plan.
When I gather statistics in public school, in K-8 in Moose Jaw, the public school enrollment peaked in 1966. And every year since then, except one, there's been a decline in the number of students in public schools. To now, in our K-12 system, it's something like 3,600. Our population remains basically unchanged. And the Director of Parks and Rec read a pretty impressive list of the facilities we have in Moose Jaw. 17 outdoor sports fields, 10 playground buildings, 17 ball diamonds. And I guess if I have to be the bearer of bad tidings, is we have the recreation and cultural amenities of a city double or triple our size. For the population of 33,000, and I would argue an economy of a city of about 25,000. And I asked for a list of the Parks and Rec capital for the last 10 years. And what it will show is that we haven't been ignoring that area at all. It's the most richly funded area of the city's capital projects the last 10 years. But we continue to build more and new and more and new, and we don't adequately fund them for the maintenance. And there is an option to throwing more money at it from the tax base that hasn't changed. And that's looking, unfortunately, to rationalize what we have. And that's very difficult because everybody wants their own special project. But it's not working financially. It's not sustainable. The money required off the tax base to do the job properly would sink the tax base. So I'm not really in favor of doing a master plan for $50,000. I'll give an example. Iron Bridge, it's been brought to our attention. Normally, those things are funded by the development of the subdivision. But the people behind this table at the time that subdivision came for bought into the idea that that subdivision didn't have to pay those fees. The argument being, well, it's going to be incorporated into the city, but there's a plan for subdivision, even though it was still just farmland. And the council of the day voted, oh yeah, you don't have to pay any offsite levies. You don't have to pay any parks dedication fees. But then now all of a sudden, the taxpayers at general are supposed to pay for those things that should have been funded from the subdivision. And that's just one example of how these things, we build all these facilities and we don't have the money to maintain them or operate them properly, but we'll build more. So I don't know what day the final straw is going to be put on the camel's back, but we're just putting a piddly amount towards a bigger problem without dealing with the real problem. So, and it'd be nice to have new lights at the cultural center that's 13 or 14 years old. It would be nice to have a master plan. It would be nice to increase the irrigation. It would be nice to have different change rooms, but someone has to pay for it. And I think we've reached the point where, as I said, I don't think our local property tax base can just keep throwing money at non-core infrastructure things and sustain ourselves.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Swanson. Mayor Tomey,
You took me off the queue.
did you push your button?
No, I never pushed it.
Okay, well, I have two others.
Yeah, I can go on.
Do you want to wait or do you want me to clear it out? Okay, Councillor Eby.
Thanks. I just have two things.
Don't push your button, because you're just taking her out. It's like Council froze.
Are you out now?
Clear the queue.
Don't push their button.
It's clear the queue.
I'm not, I'm just saying next speaker.
But if I'm already next speaker.
Yeah.
Okay.
So just clear the queue and go back to whoever is supposed to speak first.
Okay, Mayor Tomey. Councillor Eby.
Okay, thanks very much. I think one of the things that I look at with regards to our recreational facilities, pardon me, is I know that there is an increase because of when we went to build the Mosaic Place and Yarra Center. But Mosaic Place and Yarra Center are completely different from the Kinsman and from the Burt Hunt and other facilities that we have in the community. And so what we've done in recent years is to make Mosaic Place a economic driver in our community. So it hosts the Warriors, it has a curling, and we're going to be looking at getting the Scotties. We're going to be looking at getting other events such as the concert that we had last weekend, and it's a draw. And then when I take that model and I think about young kids that are part of a tournament, such as some of the tournaments that we have at the Yarra Center, you know, we're losing a lot of tournaments, speaking to some people in the community, for girls hockey because the state of our facilities. Well, that actually draws money in. When those parents come for a tournament for the weekend, they stay in our hotels, they buy food in our restaurants, they spend money in our stores, they make a time of it. And right now, what I'm hearing is that we're actually losing that, and that people are actually going to other communities. But the other thing is, I think about our facilities as being regional. And so outside of our borders, we have people that are living around our community that use those facilities as well. And so, you know, that's one of the things that we've been having conversations with the province is the regional component of the need and of our community to be able to pay, and as Councillor Swanson has quite honestly pointed out, but also the fact that there are users from outside of our community that use these facilities. And so, I think that a small investment over time for these facilities, which are neglected and run down, will provide I won't say a return, but will probably bring drawbacks or people to come back to our communities to start using these for tournaments and things like that in the near future. That's all I have to say about it.
Okay, thank you, Mayor Tomey. Councillor Eby.
Thank you. Just a couple things regarding the change rooms. I believe this was in capital budget, maybe 2015, 2016, somewhere in there, and of course got pushed out. And I think we are now, we are in a day and age where this is imperative that we have proper change rooms for people. The building was built, these buildings were built at a time when things were different, and things are no longer different. So I think I think that this just has to happen. So I'm in favor of that. The irrigation at Iron Bridge, it is a really disappointing situation that we find ourselves in, that those levies were not levied on, and the reserve wasn't built up. But I don't think that compounding a bad decision from the past is made better by making another short-sighted decision to say, well, we're not going to do that. Because when we talked earlier about the average taxpayer in Moose Jaw, and, is there 50% under the average and 50% over? I would believe that Iron Bridge is probably at the top level of the people paying taxes in our community. So they are paying taxes as well, and they should have green space in their area that is green and not brown. So the part of this that I'm not really excited about is the master plan, not because I don't agree with it or don't think that it's a good idea, but just when there's so much outstanding work, I don't know. That's a hard one for me. I get the rationalization, but I'm just not sure that it's what we need to do in 2020. That being said, I have a question regarding, I forget what was the cost we were given for the demolition of the Y building. Do we have that?
Mr. Blake.
295,000.
Thank you. Because that's, an unfunded situation as well, and we can ignore it and leave it be for a year or 2 or 5, but it's going to have to be dealt with at some point. And I do have a question regarding that. Now, never believe what you hear is rumors, but has there been some vandalism and such at the old Y building?
Mr. Blake.
Yes, thank you. Yes, we've had a few break-ins, and yeah, there was, the last one was fairly extensive, broken mirrors, windows, things like that.
So that brings me to the point is I really don't think that we are doing our community or Crescent Park any favors by leaving that out of our budget and saying, well, we can't. I mean, we don't have the money to do it, but do we want that to become, well, we all remember what Providence Hospital was when it was left vacant for all those years, and the things that happened in there, and the state of repair that building ended up in was deplorable and despicable. And I do not want to see that happen in the Y building, and it will continue to happen. It's just going to. So yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Eby. Councillor Froese.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I think one of the problems we've had in the past is that our facilities haven't been looked at as assets of our city, and we're starting to turn a corner and actually approach these buildings as such. And I think if we don't make the move to actually make these a priority, we are going to have a whole bunch of buildings that look like the natatorium that still sits there unused and in derelict. And I know there are many citizens in our city who don't want that to happen. And there are also thousands of people who live in our city, commute to Regina, who could, because they work in Regina, could live in Regina, but choose to live here. And I think one of the key reasons is because we have the recreation and quality of life here that these facilities provide. So I see these completely as assets. So I think this is the right time to start making these a priority. And to not have a plan since 1976, to me, is maybe the reason why some of these things have never kind of become a priority, is because we didn't have a plan around them. We have to start treating these buildings as complete assets. They are just as important as good roads are. And if we don't start including them in our budget, we are going to end up, they'll cost us more money down the road. And eventually we're going to have to write a check for them one way or another, whether it's to completely improve them and upgrade them or knock them over. Either way, they are. So we have to start including them in our budget. So I think these are great suggestions. And I do like Councillor Eby's suggestion about addressing the why and the demolition and figuring out where we can fund that, because having a building that sits empty like that is going to completely take away from Crescent Park. We just really have to pull a plug on this and address these things, I think. But I see our recreation facilities as a priority, and they are absolutely assets that we have to look after, or we're just going to start knocking down things left, right, and center in our city. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Froese. Councillor Swanson?
Well, thank you. I've listened to the arguments, and I guess to put the rubber to the road, then one should advocate raising the taxes to the level that would do what is being called for.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Swanson. Councillor Looning?
Thank you, Councillor Warren. So just a comment on the master plan that is included in this report. I too am not convinced that we need a master plan, but I'll tell you why, is because I think Mr. Blake gave us the plan, and that is that the unfunded projects are $8.8 million over 5 years. I don't know what more we have to know about the fact that these buildings, just as Councillor Froese has indicated, are not being maintained at a level that's sustainable. You know, there was a comment earlier on a year or so ago, 2 years ago, that we were going to start, you know, moving away from having a plan for everything, because we've had plans over the years, right? And now here I see that we want to do a master plan for Parks and Rec. And I just wanted to make that comment that, I mean, I don't believe that we need a plan for something that we already know what the reality is. Maybe there's more to it than that. I mean, I'm not the expert in that area, but I certainly know that, you know, as we build these buildings, it is forgotten that we have to, you know, operate them and maintain them. The issue that I have is that once they're built and on the books, that argument is over, and it's in the community, and we need to maintain them, and we need to make an effort to keep the buildings up to par. And if we don't, which we're not doing, you know, we are shooting ourselves in the foot. But it is that balance of, you know, how much can the community afford, and that sort of a thing. And I understand that. So, I mean, all of this, I mean, every budget process is difficult, but we do have a lot of facilities on the books that need work. And the longer we ignore it, the longer we push it off. So maybe, you know, initially when I read the report and thought that there's a 1% increase in here for Parks and Rec, I was kind of, okay, interesting. As I read it further, it completely makes sense, because you got to start somewhere, right? You know, maybe this year it's 1%, but down the road, the future council say, you know what, maybe it needs to be 2%, or it needs to be whatever, you know, whatever. I mean, the reality is yeah, the cost of things go up, and you know, I'll use the example of Mosaic Place in Yarra. You know, they're in the community, they're bringing things to the community, and they need to be maintained, just as the Playmore Palace does, the Kidman Arena, whatever. So I think the plan is there, that we know these things are underfunded and we have to put some money towards them. Thank you.
Thanks, Councilor Looney. Mayor Tomey.
Yeah, thank you very much. I just trying to find where we had our strategic plan included in this. I know it's in the front here. Do we know, anybody know the page here? Sorry. Yeah, but there's right, page 2 here. I think there was something within our strategic plan of about doing more things in-house. Sorry that I'm taking up everybody's time, but I just thought I had more time there.
That's one of the budget principles, Your Worship.
Budget principles, right. So, you know, staying on the budget principle and what's being shared around here with regards to the master plan, maybe this is not the right year, and maybe this is something that we could be reevaluating. And with that, what I'll do is I'll move the first 3 parts of the recommendation, that the Parks and Recreation Department complete dressing room upgrades at the Playmore Palace to better serve all users of the facility, with the source of funding being the 2020 capital budget in the amount of $109,000. And that the Parks and Recreation Department complete an LED light conversion at the Moose Jaw Cultural Center to increase energy efficiency, with the source of funding being the 2020 capital budget in the amount of $80,000. And that the Park and Recreation Department complete irrigation upgrades in the Iron Bridge development to improve the quality of the park space, with the source of funding being the 2020 capital budget in the amount of $51,000.
Okay, thank you, Mayor Tomey. Councilor McMahon.
Just a point of question here. Isn't this already part of the table motion from the first?
No, this is a new report.
It's a new report, but this 1% was in that.
Oh,
yeah.
So I think this is just to identify the projects that the 1% would be spent on, I think.
Yeah, if I can just comment, Mr. Chair, you're correct. In the finalizing motion, part of that finalizing motion is to allocate 1% to this. So they kind of go hand in hand. This is the expenditure side of it, but it is included in that preliminary budget.
Okay. Okay, I just assumed it was.
Did your light come on, Councilor Looney?
Yes. Oh, sorry.
Okay, sorry, Councilor Looney. I didn't know because I pushed the button at the exact same time you did. So,
I wasn't looking, but I was waiting for you to say my name, and I
Well,
didn't hear it. And
I didn't
then,
want to
yeah.
mess it up. I didn't want to mess it up.
So just further to what Councillor McMahon has asked, which is a good point on his part, which is why I asked the question initially after Mr. Blais went through this, whether these projects were in the if these were in the budget or if this was an additional ask. So that's where this report again, and but this is confusing as well, right? So, you know, we don't need that motion because it's in there, right? Including the master plan is in there, right? So it's our job, if this council decides that it doesn't want the master plan, then we'd have to remove that, right? Is what.
Mr. Acker?
If I can just clarify, no, these projects are not in the capital budget.
No, but 1%.
The 1% funding is, but that doesn't mean you have to spend that 1% on that. And as well, at the finalization point of the budget, you will actually approve that 1%, right? So we're dealing with both sides of it. One is the expenditures proposed for them. The other will be at finalization to actually increase taxes 1% to provide that funding. So there's 2 sides to it. You could not approve these. Still approve the 1%, you would have an additional 295,000.
Yeah, I get that. Yeah, thank you, Mr. Acker. Yeah. But, yeah, okay.
Okay, good. Okay.
Good.
Okay, thanks, Councilor Looney. Mayor Tomey?
Yeah, so I mean, process-wise, I will then, because they have not been allocated as identified projects in the previous budget that we've tabled, then my motion is in order. Is that what, because we need, that's what I think council is looking for, is clarification on the process.
Absolutely, your motion is in order, and if you were to approve this, we would then include them in the budget.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mayor Tomey. Councilor Looney?
Thank you. I'll move to table this.
Tabling motion, no other speakers, all those in favor, opposed, carried. Okay, the next report is report CC 2019-0251 slumping strategy. Mr. Pufol.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We would suggest that item F and G be referred to the December 4th meeting. Again, those were just recently forwarded to you, and we want to give sufficient time for council to review.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Pufol. Would that be the wishes of council? Yeah. Would anybody like to make that motion?
I'll make the
Councilor
motion.
Rose.
Yeah, I'll make the motion to table it.
Okay, motion to table this report.
Slumping strategy.
All those in favor? That's carried. And the next item, similar to what Mr. Pufol just mentioned, is a report on the Buffalo Pound Water Treatment Plant Transmission Line, Phase 2 Fluoridation System, and Northeast Reservoir Influent. And again, a report that just came today, so wishes of council to table this report to allow some time to go through that report. Councilor Froese.
I'll make the motion to table it.
Okay, motion to table. Councilor Froese, thank you. All those in favor? And that's carried. The next item is the report CC 2019-0245, the 2020 investment portfolio drawdown.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We're glad to be able to present this one this evening. Mr. Acker is here. We'll go through the details, but again, as council is aware, I think everybody's well aware that their investment committee has been established and is working on increasing interest revenue generated from our reserve funds. And this report outlines where the funding would go towards. And Mr. Acker, please.
Thank you, Chair. So just in summary for the report, the purpose of this report is to request council's approval of the proposed 2020 drawdown of investment funds. That's a requirement of bylaw 5558 that you approved, which created the investment committee. And what it requires is that council approve that on an annual basis. Just to sort of give you some perspective, so we have approximately $100 million in investments managed by professional portfolio managers. Our expected return on the long-term portion of that portfolio, which is about $70 million, is 6%. And our expected return on the moderate-term investment portfolio is 4.25%, and that's the other 30 million of the 100 million. We also estimate inflation to be 2% for 2020, and that plays into the overall drawdown. On the second page of the report is a chart which outlines all of the various monies that we do have invested, the slightly over 70 million in long-term funds and the just over 30 million in medium-term funds. And the proposed drawdown of those. I will just touch on a couple of the more major ones. Our capital expenditure fund equity, we have approximately $37.6 million in that equity. We utilize the interest on that from that equity to fund our general capital reserve. That forms part of those investment earnings that you see in there that fund our ongoing transportation, parks and recreation, and those sorts of capital projects. So we're requesting 4% of that be drawn down, leaving 2%, which provides for inflation, so it maintains the purchasing power of that reserve going forward. Another one is our land development funds. We have that broken into two two pools. Half is in our long-term funds and half is in medium-term. Again, we would propose drawing down the investment earnings on that. That flows into our general capital reserve as well. I won't go through all of them, but if you were to go to the general capital reserve, and perhaps I can ask our city comptroller just to go to the summary page. You'll see under investment earnings, if we could make that a little bigger. So under the capital expenditure fund interest, you'll see in 2020, we're expecting $2,610 in investment earnings. So that is the monies from the capital expenditure fund equity, the monies from the land development fund. Add those together, that's that $2,610,000. So we're utilizing that in our budgets to fund our capital programs. We've done that previously in the past. In the past, they just came to you in the form of the budget. There was no need for council to approve separately. So that's the majority of it, to be honest, is that $2,610,000. We also draw interest off the perpetual care fund, which helps fund our cemetery maintenance. That's $130,000. You would find that in the operating budget if you went to that page within that budget. And there are a couple smaller ones, but I won't get into the detail on those. Overall, our request is for $3,067,341 to be drawn from our investment funds. And drawdown is perhaps a bad word because we're not actually drawing down the principal. We would be drawing down the investment earnings. And actually, we will be leaving investment earnings within the fund. So it's utilizing those investment earnings to fund our programs and services. So with that, I will be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Acker. Questions? Comments? Councillor Swanson.
Thank you. I've indicated previously I would be in favor of spending some of the reserves for core infrastructure upgrades. That was prior to us taking the money and putting it largely into the stock market. I think this motion has it backwards. To say we're going to assume a 6% return from the stock market is easy to say, but history will show that it's pretty hard to back up. It very well could be 6%, it could be 10%, it could be minus 10%. So to draw down future stock market gains, I said it's got it backwards. We should be drawing down based on the previous year's earnings. Worst case scenario, one that should be guarded against, is to draw down these in advance of a year where there's a negative return, which history will show is quite possible. So we should be looking at the end of next year saying, here's what the return on this investment committee's funds were. Here's how much we can withdraw. To withdraw it in advance of that's like me budgeting for next year on the assumption I'm going to win the lottery. So I'm not opposed to spending capital reserves, but when we start investing the money into riskier returns and just assuming we're going to get a 6% return,
Okay, thank you, Councillor Swanson. Councillor Looning.
Thank you, Councillor Warren. Well, I don't even know where to start. The first thing I want to say is that to say that the investment committee has invested the funds of the city of Moose Jaw into the stock market is harsh and just not true. Because we did not put all of the 100 whatever million on red and spin the wheel and take a gamble on our reserves. So in fact, my first question is going to be through you, Councillor Warren, to Mr. Acker. Do we know, because I meant to send you an email today and I apologize, I was busy in my office. Do we know what the return is up to date where we're at now? Thank you, Mr. Acker.
Mr. Acker.
Actually, that's why I partially had my light flashing. I actually just checked this evening. So we have we're not quite at the $100 million. I believe we still have one more $4 million payment, so we're at 96 million. That money has gone in since July, so it's over a period of time. Our return as of this evening was we've gained $2,119,677. So it's a substantive gain to this point. Doesn't mean that's where we'll end up at the end of the year, obviously, but I think it does provide some level of comfort that the monies are being properly invested, they're being managed, there's risk involved taken into account. We have appropriate amounts of fixed income as well as some equity. The one thing I did want to point out, if I can just jump in and then I'll let you have everything back, Councillor Looney.
Yes.
Within the communication, we do mention something to sort of counter and the concerns that Councillor Swanson has is what we would do is draw down for 2020 the amount of money we do. If we find out 2020 is a particularly bad year, we would adjust in 2021. To do it at this point in time, if we were not to draw down until we waited to see what we earned for 2020, what we would be doing is basically skipping a year of investment earnings, because we've always done that. We've always said, oh, we're going to make whatever money, we're going to utilize it in capital, right? If we were to do what is being suggested, we would be putting a zero in our capital budget for investment income this year, which means we would be another $2.6 million short. We would put a zero in our operating budget for the cemetery perpetual care monies, which means we would be $130,000 short. And to be honest, in a prudent manner, this money has been invested in a prudent manner. We are starting to see the fruits of that labor. Will it go up and down? Absolutely. I think it's absolutely documented, though. If you look on historical trends, you will get a return. If you have a balanced portfolio that's allocated, that will be certainly above what we were getting in fixed income. So I think that clause that we have in there, that we will review our drawdown the next year, is something we certainly will do. The other thing we will do as well is we're not drawing all that money down January 1st, 2020. It would be drawn down through the year, and to be honest, for the most part, probably in the latter part of the year. So if there was some horrendous thing that happened, we could always revisit it at that point in time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Acker. I don't think I really need to say too much after what Mr. Acker just informed us and the public about. But there is a couple things that I want to say, and I've said this before, is that we are not this money is money that is in a corporation that is going to last forever. Corporations last forever. We're not investing. It's very different than investing your own personal money, and you have to look at it on a very long-term basis. And there is opportunity in the market when the GIC interest rates are low and the bond rates are low to try and look to other ways of investing that will provide a higher rate of return. And I'll reiterate again, the investment committee has not put everything in aggressive funds and said, we're going to get 20% and we're okay with it going down 10, or we're okay with it going down 13. And I will not sit here as a member of the investment committee and allow a colleague of mine to try and tell the community that that's what we're doing, because we're not. We are being moderate and prudent, and we're doing this in a way with professionals that we are, anything can happen. I'm in the industry, anything can happen. But this is a long term, and as Mr. Acker stressed, if you look at the markets over time, yes, they go up and down, but they also go up. And if we can earn a little bit more than we've earned over the years by doing it this way, it's okay to try, because if it doesn't work, I said it before, we go back to what we were doing before. And I pulled up a couple of, different, and this is complete. The investing that we're doing on this institutional basis is very different. But I pulled up a few funds that I have access to, and any advisor out there has access to, and the bond funds are doing well. You can look at a bond fund right now, which is where some of our things, our investments are. And on the year, the bond funds are doing anywhere between 7 and 9%. So, I mean, if we would have been in a GIC, we would have only been making 2 or 3 or 4, whatever those yields are. So, I mean, I have to clarify that, as a member of the investment committee, I take offense to the fact that we're being portrayed that we're putting everything on red and gambling the city's money, because that is not what we're doing. So, thank you, Mr. Acker, for filling us in on the return and where we're at this year. This is not doom and gloom with what the investment committee has done. This could be very good for the city of Moose Jaw over a long, long period of time. And that's the outlook we have to look at when we're dealing with the corporation of the city of Moose Jaw. It's a long-term investment. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Looning. Mayor Tomey.
Yeah, thank you. I echo your comments, Councillor Looning, and I do appreciate you, your position. And, I think one of the things that we as a council, our intention is to reduce the tax burden on the citizens of Moose Jaw. As it's been said, there's countless numbers of things that are outstanding items that, the city could, maybe many people want that are gold plated and we can't afford. But what we can do is wisely steward the finances that we have and use them to maximize and benefit the citizens in order to get a better return and to be able to get things as needed for our yearly budgets. So I appreciate the comments being brought forward. I thank those on the investment committee, and we've already seen returns that are better than what we've had. So thank you. And we have to be optimistic and understand that you do have to ride the waves. There will be dips, but as we've all known, when we all go to financial advisors and everybody else, you've got to ride the storm.
Okay. Thank you, Mayor Tomey. Councillor Swanson.
Thank you. Through you to the Director of Finance. The gain that we've had this year, was that largely due to the sale of bonds?
Mr. Acker.
Thank you, Chair, through you to Councillor Swanson. No, that's the return that we've had since we've invested the monies in that portfolio. That bond return was prior to that.
Thank you. And I just want to say, Councillor Looning can take all the offense she wants when she puts words in my mouth. I never once said we're putting it all on red. I said, I'll stand by what I said. I saw the investment guidelines, something like 70% is going into equities. That's what I've talked about. And I'm as familiar with it as anyone is about the returns of equities. But, frankly, I've talked to a lot of people in the community, many very sophisticated business people, and I have yet to find anyone that thinks it's a good idea that we've done this. Now, maybe you talk to people that think it does, but I've talked to a lot of people about this, and they have concerns. And I'll stand by what I say, not by what people say I say.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Swanson. Mayor Tomey.
Yeah, I too have spoken to people in the community, and a lot of people that I've spoken to, I think that this is a good idea. And with that being said, I'll move the recommendation that City Council approve the drawdown of the investment portfolio in the amount of $3,067,341 for 2020.
Okay, thank you, Mayor Tomey. Seeing no other speakers in the queue, I will call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. All right, so we are at time is it 9:06. We are on referred matters. Moose Jaw Board of Police Commissioners and Moose Jaw Police Service 2020 budget submissions. Report CC 2019-0234. Mr. Acker.
Thank you, Chair. So the first one on your agenda is the Moose Jaw Board of Police Commissioners. They had their presentation on November 18th to Council. That communication is referred to you. Within that communication was a request for funding. And I believe you have a motion in that regards. You really have two options in terms of the police service. You can approve what has been requested, or you can send back to the Board of Police Commissioners with reasons why you are not approving that and ask them to review and resubmit their budget. So the decision point really is you can approve what has been requested, or you can send back the budget and ask them to revisit it for whatever reasons you've proposed. One final comment I would provide is within the budget that has been proposed to you, the 2.02% is the amount they have asked for. That is included in there already. So if you were to approve the police service budget this evening, it will not change the mill rate of 2.02%. Likewise for capital, that's 67,500 as well as in the existing capital budget. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Acker. Mayor Tomey.
So I will move that the police service operating budget be approved with the net funding in the amount of $10,129,563, and further that $110,000 be transferred from the traffic safety reserve to the Moose Jaw Police Service, and further that the police capital budget be approved with funding in the amount of $67,500 in 2020.
Okay, thank you, Mayor Tomey. Do you want to speak to that, or do you want to wait?
Yeah, I'll wait.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Any other questions, comments? Councillor Swanson?
Thank you. When the presentation was made to us at the night that the groups presented, there was graphs showing the number of police officers per population. I don't think that showed the whole picture, because Prince Albert, Regina, and Saskatoon have disproportionately higher numbers of provincially funded officers than does Moose Jaw. And when I was on the police commission, I brought that point up and requested the information be shown for both cases. And it kind of bothers me that we've reverted back to showing numbers that gloss over the fact that the provincial government, the Ministry of Justice, in their view of the policing needs of the various communities, have determined that they should provide significant funding for Saskatoon, Regina, and Prince Albert for a large number of provincially funded officers. I made that point when I was on the police commission. Subsequently, we were granted some provincially funded officers, but we're still at a disproportionate ratio to those other communities. And I think that is a reflection of the Ministry of Justice's observation of the incidence of crime in those communities. So I just think that it's important to point out that there is a second set of statistics that should be revealed to the community about policing when we're talking about that. And that is how the provincial government funds a considerable level of police officers for Prince Albert, Saskatoon, and Regina that they don't hear on a proportional basis. And I also expressed the concern that it would be, this budget calls for an expansion of the police service, hiring another officer, and it's the oft-used method of only including 30% of the cost in this year's budget. So we're set up for next year, the other 70%. And I know it's a constant request from the police service to increase the number of officers, but when you have an organization that consistently receives higher than everybody else salary increases and then also keeps expanding, that, just like our parks and recreation facilities, is not sustainable in a community that doesn't have population growth. I just wanted to make those 2 points. I support the allocation of the automated speed enforcement money to the police service. When I was on the police commission, I initiated that recommendation that we were able to increase the number of officers with funding that was dedicated from the photo radar.
Thank you, Councillor Swanson. Councillor McMahon.
Thank you. I'm certainly not as familiar with the not having served on the police commission as many of the folks here have, but I guess it ran through my mind certainly when we got that presentation, that and sort of a similar vein to, I think, to what Councillor Swanson was saying, was I'm struggling with why they should get more than whatever we end up for mill rate increase. So if we end up at 2.25, then to me, that's what the police should get. I don't know why they should get more than we're expecting others to live by. So at this point, I'm struggling with why I want to support a 3.26%. I really believe that at some point we do have to restrict them somewhat, to restrict the ask, I guess. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor McMahon. Councillor Swanson.
Could I ask that we vote on these resolutions separately, please?
Okay, Councillor Eby.
Thank you. It is hard, and I agree with Council McMahon, like when their increase that they're asking for is more than what we are going to increase our own budget, it's hard to get behind it 100%, but I do believe that our community is fully supportive of our police force, and I don't think it's a surprise to anyone in our community that crime and violent crime has been on the rise, and maybe it's not as bad in Moose Jaw as it is in PA or as it is in Regina, but it's worse in Moose Jaw than it has ever been, and the use of crystal meth is driving a lot of things in our city. I, for one, it doesn't matter. I don't feel comfortable walking home from a Warriors hockey game across the 4th Avenue Bridge anymore. I used to all the time at 9:30 at night. I don't feel safe. So I am going to support this motion. I know that the police officers make a very good wage. They make more money than some of us, for sure. I wouldn't want to do their job. They are, as we have heard before, and we know that, when they are working nights, they're working nights. They are out patrolling. I had the opportunity to do a ride along in 2013, I believe, and it was very eye-opening for me. I had no idea what, you think you know what they're up against and what they're going into, but you don't know what you don't know. So I am going to support this. I do understand the hesitation of other members of council, but that being said, I am going to support the motion.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Eby. Mayor Tomey.
Yeah, thank you. I know with regards to the comments that Councillor Swanson has brought forward with regards to the funding of other police services in our province. This is something that we are continually advocating for our own police service, that we get a fair share of police officers being funded by the province. However, until that happens, the challenges that this community faces, what can't be measured in graphs and charts are the stresses that are put on our existing police officers on duty. And as a result, through sitting in meetings and having conversations with senior police officers and even junior police officers of the challenges of meth, what we don't want to do is put ourselves in a hole where we can't deal with an increase in crime and an increase in violent crimes, because that's what meth does in communities. And as been said, we are in a corridor that goes from Edmonton to Winnipeg. And unfortunately, we're a stop-off point. And it is a challenge, and it is a stress and a challenge for our existing police service. And so that is why the request is being brought forward now to say that we're doing our part, but we also have to say to the province, now it's your turn and you have to help us out.
Thank you, Mayor Tomey. Councillor Froese.
Thank you, Chair. Being on police commission since I was first elected has been a real learning curve and a real big eye opener. And I agree with Councillor Eby too about sort of the safety feeling aspect that we have in our city is gradually changing. And I experienced that on South Hill as well, about where you want to walk. We hear from our citizens that they don't even feel comfortable walking through Crescent Park anymore. And directly from the police, they have been affected in such a high level of stress because of the opioid crisis that we have. It's not just here in our city, but across Canada. And dealing particularly with meth brings on a whole new challenge where when they pick somebody up who is high on this drug, because of its unpredictability, they actually have to be with that person for the entire time, even when they take them to the emergency room, because of the violent tendencies that this drug has. And that puts an added stress on our officers and takes them kind of off the street during their shift. So things have changed in a short amount of time quite dramatically for our officers. And it's increased the petty crime in our city. It's affecting our neighborhoods, the safety aspect. And we have and I don't know what happened previously on the previous commissions or previously in council, but our commission has worked very hard in putting Moose Jaw back on the radar with the province and concerning that we are underfunded when it comes to our officers. And I know the combined traffic safety program is, they quite often quote that as a initiative to give us more officers, but they actually spend 75% or 70% of their time outside of our city doing regional policing. So they're not actually 100% in our city policing. So that can be it can be a bit of a misleading when you're thinking that we have a full force and you include those in there, because really they only equate to maybe 1.2% or 1.2 time frame, as opposed to the 4 additional officers that they gave us. And we had to request to get the PACT program and the mental health issues that are on our streets and that. So this is a very complex issue, and the stresses on our police force are evident, as is the things that we hear from our citizens. So things are ever changing in this area, and I think we have to give the tools and resources to our police officers in order to help at least try to keep up to these issues. So I'm in support of this motion. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Froese. If I could just pass the gavel. Thank you, Mayor Tomey. So yeah, having served on the police commission for the last year and a half or year and a bit, I too could echo some of the comments that it has been an eye opener. I mean, my dad grew up. I guess I grew up. My dad is an RCMP officer, but you know, this is a totally different experience. You know, talking to the police, talking to the frontline staff, hearing about the issues, you know, seeing the things that our officers are facing on a daily basis is definitely it's eye-opening. So I mean, you know, the statistics are in the reports. You know, our crime rates have increased over the years. Our crime severity has increased, and although we're not maybe as high as you know, a municipality like Prince Albert, we're right in line with Regina and Saskatoon. You know, our service gets over 15,000 calls every year. You know, that's a high number of calls, and that's increased every year. To echo, you know, speak to Councillor Swanson's discussion is that we, you know, as a municipality, we do have the lowest rates of police officers per capita, and you know, so again, that just goes to show the workload that our officers are faced with every day. Again, some of the things that have taken place in the last couple of years, we haven't traditionally had to deal with, or we have, but we've been under capacity or not with expertise. But these are things that our police service is working to enhance and improve so that when they're out in the community, they can better serve our community. Things like the PACT, police and crisis team. So again, this is a focus on mental health. It brings in mental health professionals to work directly with our officers in dealing with these issues, dealing with some of these things. And I don't have this statistic in front of me, but the report showed that we've substantially, I think within 100 or a couple hundred number of calls reduced, for our officers and having to deal with some of these issues because of this enhanced response. The South Central Child Abuse Investigation Team. Again, it's our officers working directly with social services and social workers in getting in and investigating these extremely difficult and challenging circumstances are brought forward. We have now a new team with expertise to be able to help address these issues and protect our most vulnerable. The expansion of the canine unit and our search and rescue abilities. So we went from having one canine, one dog, one police dog available, at a very only 25% of the time to having up 4 police dogs now with the ability to have a canine unit on every shift. So all the things that come into that. We're looking at innovations, so bringing in drone technology. Again, enhancing our ability to do search and rescue. And one of the stories brought forward was that drone technology can be used to find somebody in a field, whereas that might take days, where this drone could take minutes or hours. So I mean, again, there's the force is looking to be more innovative in being able to deliver and protect our residents. So yeah, I mean, I'm in support of this budget. I'm in support of the additional officer. Councillor Fro spoke to the fact that yes, our force has increased, but we still have the lowest number per capita. But a bunch of those resources are going towards traffic safety, which is important as well, but traffic safety both in and outside of the community. This additional police officer that's in this budget would be going directly to whatever work unit, most likely boots on the ground, on the shift, dealing with those day-to-day calls that our officers are receiving, really ensuring that our just again one small step towards ensuring that our frontline officers can deal with these issues effectively and also helping out in terms of the health and well-being of the officer, him or herself. We're seeing with our officers for various reasons, having to come in and work overtime, long shifts, things like that. I mean, that plays into the health and well-being of our officers. So adding this extra police officer is going to be directly linked to helping towards improving the health and safety of our workers. So again, I'm in favor of this and appreciative of the opportunity to be able to be on the board as well as speak to some of their achievements. Thank you. Councillor Eby.
Thanks. I just have one quick question, actually would be for Mr. Acker, because he would be the only one at the table to remember this, but just really to refresh my own memory. Back in about like 2010, 11, 12, was not the police budget a straight like 26% of the overall budget? Is that how?
Mr. Acker.
Thank you, Chair, through you to Councillor Eby. Yes, what we used to do is, as a city, we used to actually budget on a net budget basis. So we took into account our revenues that were attached to various departments, and we just ended up with a net. At that point in time, the police were limited to 26% of the net budget. And that sort of disappeared in that period because the police service at that point in time were never exceeding that. They were actually coming in below that, so that dropped away and was gone. We now budget on a gross basis, so we show our
So it's
gross
different.
revenues, so that's where they're now in about the 23% range. So.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Eby. Okay, so I'm seeing no other speakers in the queue. So we've got 3 motions on the floor, and we've been asked to vote on these separately. So the first one would be that the police service operating budget be approved with net funding in the amount of $10,129,563. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. The second one was that $110,000 be transferred from the traffic safety reserve to the Moose Jaw Police Service. Seeing no speakers, I'll call the question. All those in favor? And that's carried unanimously. And lastly, that the police service capital budget be approved with funding in the amount of $67,500 in 2020. I will call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Okay. So just before we move on to the next item, council, we are at 9:30. We have hit the 4-hour mark. Just testing the capacity, the will of council in terms of moving forward. We still do have 2 additional budget, I guess, special meetings scheduled to continue dealing with the few other matters. So wishes of council at this time. Councillor McMahon.
I've had enough. I'll move adjournment.
Actually, Chair, I think we have to rise report, so the whole report, reports as follows.
Okay. So I would just rise and report, and then Mayor told me to.
That's correct.
Okay. Okay. So at that item, your committee of the whole begs to report as follows.
Thank you. We have a motion that's moved by Councillor Froh, seconded by Councillor Eby, that the report of the committee of the whole be taken as read, received, and adopted. Call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And the next special meeting of City Council is scheduled for Wednesday, December 2014, or 20, sorry. Wednesday, December 4th, 2019. And with that, council, we are adjourned.
I think we wrap that up.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor McMahon. Yeah.